Fire up across the internet, then we're going to get started. We've got a lot to get to today. Usually need to wait about 5-10 seconds for YouTube and Facebook and Twitch and some of the others to get alive and well, but it looks like we're about there, so let's get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a little thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And so that's why we started this show called Watching the Watchers, so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon our very system with the hope of finding justice. And we're grateful that you are here and with us today. We are diving into it. We're going to wrap up Chauvin's jury selection. I think we're going to be done with Chauvin for the rest of the week. A little bit of a vacation on that because they have 15 jurors who are now going to be a part of the panel. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through every single one of the 15 people, and we're going to sort of weigh in on where we think that they might fall in terms of voting, guilty or not guilty. So we'll have a little bit of fun with that. It's we don't have a lot of information on it, so we're sort of just speculating, but we'll see how this whole thing fleshes out. So I'm looking forward to getting to that in the first part of the show. Then we're going to change gears a little bit. Of course, we have to talk about this Colorado shooting that took place out in Boulder, Colorado yesterday. Have a little bit of background on what's going on here. We're also going to look at this through the sort of the media lens. A lot of people were primed and ready to go with this to sort of craft a narrative about gun control and about white supremacy and about violence that we're seeing called sort of relabeled now as domestic violent extremism. And that whole narrative kind of went out the window when we learned a little bit more about the shooter. So we're going to break that down. We're going to take a look at some of the response that's already underway. We know that this just took place yesterday, and already Joe Biden is out there talking about gun control, passing legislation to ban AR-15s and assault weapons and so on and so forth. So we're going to break that down. And then, of course, we got to wrap up a little bit on what is going on down at the border, because yesterday we spoke about it and some more information was revealed today. A new video came out, and I went through and looked at a lot of the sort of Border Patrol, Customs, and Immigration Enforcement rules that are now on their website. And I want to run through that a little bit so we have a better understanding of what we're talking about. I'm not an immigration attorney. I don't practice in this particular field, but we're looking at what other people who are coming into the country can see when they go on our government's website. So I want to show you what all of that looks like. So we've got a lot to get into today. As always, if you have any questions, I think we figured out our little technical glitch that we had yesterday. So we will be taking questions again. If you have any, please feel free to send those over on our locals.com platform. It's at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. There's a live chat that goes over there that's sort of running simultaneously with what we're doing here on YouTube and Facebook and elsewhere. And so if you have a question, just go on over to that platform, ask it there, and Miss Faith, who's right back there in the room behind me, we'll clip it and add it into our slides. And of course, it's a good way to support the show. We appreciate you going over there and checking that out. You can download a copy of all of these slides there as well. So once again, it's watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We appreciate your support. All right, so let's get into the first story of the day. Today, Derek Chauvin's trial wrapped up with jury selection, which is good news. We've been spending the last two weeks or so trying to identify 15 jurors who are going to be a part of the trial. Now, only 14 of those are actually going to be a part of the panel. The judge picked a 15th individual today, which wrapped up the whole proceeding, just in case something happens to the other 14. So juror number 15 kind of has the most thankless job of anybody here. He's just kind of got to hang out until Monday. Soon as the trial starts, as opening arguments unfold, then this guy is going to be let go. Hey, thanks for your service for being here for about 5 days, but we don't need you anymore. Thanks for playing. So he goes away. Then we boil back down to the original 14 who are going to be a part of this jury panel. And so we got to learn a little bit more about these individuals. And I've been keeping tabs on who these people are as much as we know. This is what the trial board looks like. And you can see here that my emojis are now up to date with all 15 people on the panel. We've got ages and ethnicities, demographics, And so we're going to go through each one of these individuals today, and we're going to sort of determine how we think they might fall. Are they going to be innocent of voting for an acquittal, or are they going to be voting for a conviction? And you can see here what I did on our chart is I created a column down here on the right-hand side. And so we're going to go through here, and we're just going to analyze. What is number one? Is he going to be a conviction or an acquittal? We're going to go out, we're going to fill this up with checks and circles to get some answers to those questions. So we're going to do that today. Let's take a look, and we're going to get our synopsis from the Star Tribune. They're doing great reporting on this, and they have a summation of the different jurors who are a part of the panel. So let's break this down. Who are the jurors in the Derek Chauvin trial? Though the jurors will remain anonymous, here's what we know about the jury seated for the trial of Derek Chauvin in the killing of George Floyd. 12 jurors and 3 alternates have finally been seated in the killing of George Floyd trial against Derek Chauvin. One of the 3 alternatives will be excused when trial begins on March 29th. That's Monday. That's coming up very, very soon. Jury selection completed today on Tuesday after 2 weeks of questioning and the dismissal of 2 previously selected jurors. You recall that those 2 were let go after they heard about news of the settlement. Chauvin trial is being broadcast around the world via live stream inside the courtroom, but jurors will never appear on screen and will remain anonymous. They are referred to in court and below by their juror number through the jury selection process, in which Peter Cahill, the judge, attorneys from both sides, they all question potential jurors. What the Star Tribune did is they gathered information on those who were selected for the jury. They've got their ages, marital status, occupations, as well as how they feel about BLM and police in general, as well as the presumption of innocence, which of course is something we talk a lot about here on this show. And so we're going to go through one by one. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this. But once again, this is what we're looking for. This is our demographic panel, and we want to break this down and see if we can identify, just based on the very little we know, what each juror is going to do. How are they going to vote? Acquittal or a conviction? So let's go in and start with juror number 1. And we're going to go through this relatively quickly because there's 14 to 15 of them. So, all right, this is juror number 1. He started out as juror number 2. I'm going to relabel him as juror number 1 because he's the first guy on the panel. White man in his 20s. He's from Minneapolis. He works as a chemist. And so this is somebody who's a scientist, somebody with some technical background. Typically those people are, logical, rational. They like numbers. They like data, hard data. Because of his profession, he said, I consider myself a pretty logical person. I rely on facts and logic and what's in front of me. Opinions and facts are important distinctions from me. He said that he has a generally favorably view of BLM, but added, I think all lives matter equally, and that the Blue Lives Matter message among police advocates is a counter viewpoint that isn't necessary. So it's like a little bit too provocative, it sounds like. He has not viewed the bystander video of George Floyd's death, which is crazy. He's probably the only juror that we know of that I've seen thus far who hasn't seen it. He has visited 38th in Chicago, where Floyd was killed, because he and his fiance considered moving to the area. So couple reasons, or couple thoughts on this. Number 1, the fact that he's a chemist, the fact that he is somebody who said specifically that I like logic, I like facts, going to try to separate emotion from this thing. He sounds very analytical in that regard, not somebody who's going to be overly emotional about what we saw. And of course, what we saw in the video is highly emotional. You don't get to see any of the toxicology reports. You don't get to hear about the 2019 prior. There's a lot of missing data from that. So when you see that, it's very easy to get emotional. He's not. He says he's going to be, kind of like a nuts and bolts, law, logistical facts, data, kind of like an engineer. And so when it comes to juror number 1, I put him in the not guilty verdict. Not guilty on that one. I think that maybe he comes back and he says, well, just based on the toxicology report, based on the timeline and the sequence of events, doesn't look like it's a conviction. If I had to guess, I'd put him in that category. And this is all just speculation. We're just having a little bit of fun here. So juror number 1 goes into the not guilty, and this is the symbol that we're using for that. All right, so we go over to juror number 2 now. This is a multi-race woman in her 20s. She's originally from northern Minnesota. She was super excited to receive her jury summons, and she said that in court. I actually remember that. She seemed very kind of giddy about it. To receive her jury summons because she believes it's her civic duty. She said she was eager to serve regardless of the case, but especially in Chauvin's trial, given the gravity of it. It's a very important case, she said, not just for Hennepin County, but nationwide. It's just something everyone's heard about, talked about. No matter the decision, people are still going to talk about it. She said viewing the video left her with a somewhat negative impression of Chauvin. No one wants to see someone die. The woman also said she sees racial disparity in the justice system in connection with that belief. She added that she agrees somewhat with Minneapolis police officers at times use too much force against black suspects. She considers herself a go-with-the-flow type and assured that she can be open-minded about the evidence. Also, she's a niece of a Brainerd police officer. And so, the initial thought here as well, her uncle is a police officer. So she's pretty close in proximity to that person. So maybe she's got some pro-police bias, and this would lead her to be somebody who would be in Derek Chauvin's camp, and maybe she would be an acquittal verdict, basically not guilty. And I'm not so sure that I see that. She's talked pretty positively about racial disparity in the justice system. She's identified that, said that she did watch the video, said that she had a somewhat negative impression about it. Also communicated here that she's a go-with-the-flow type of person. Okay, that is sort of, I think the flow is going in the direction of a guilty verdict. I mean, I think, with the media, with a lot of people out there sort of talking about it, I think that the popular sentiment in this country at this moment in time is guilty for Derek Chauvin. If she's a go-with-the-flow type, and that is the general disposition on the jury panel, I have a hard time believing that she's going to go against the grain on this. She's also talked about, sort of the gravity of the situation leads me to believe that she may be inclined to vote for guilt, to convict Derek Chauvin. And so we gave her the check box. Okay, so check means that they sort of check the box and they can go with the conviction. Red means stop, nope, not guilty, no conviction, acquittal on that. All right, so that's number 1 and number 2. These are going to speed up because we have less information about some of the other jurors. Number 3 is a white man, works as an auditor. He said he was chosen for the jury after expressing confidence that he could be fair, served on a jury 5 years ago, but was dismissed as an alternate. Says, I was slightly disappointed after hearing the process. I think it's an important part of our society. He said he saw at least portions of the video and had a somewhat negative view of Chauvin because someone died, and that's obviously not a positive thing. So at the same time, the man continued, he said he can examine the evidence from a viewpoint of the law before deciding whether or not the defendant is guilty. And so on these types of cases, this guy's pretty neutral just based on this fact. He said, I was slightly disappointed about hearing about after the process in his first jury selection. He says, someone died. That's obviously not a positive thing. He saw portions of the video and he had a somewhat negative view of Chauvin. And so when you have something that's kind of close like this, there's not much that we can sink our teeth into on this guy about whether he's going to go one way or the other. I'm going to go with the default that he would vote for a conviction. So, typically, in my experience as a practicing criminal defense lawyer, yes, the presumption of innocence is a real legal thing, but whether jurors actually believe in that is a whole separate ballgame. That's a whole entirely different reality. A judge can sit a juror down and say, hey, there's a presumption of innocence, and they'll go, yes, I know. And then you'll walk your client into the courtroom and they go, that guy is guilty as hell, because people are just sort of hardwired that way. So the default in my mind is when it's a close call, we're going to vote that in favor of a conviction. I think that is kind of the default. The abnormalities are going to be anybody who votes for acquittal, who votes for not guilty. So juror number 3, we're going to go ahead and say he would be supportive of a conviction. He would vote to convict Derek Chauvin. Next up, we have juror number 4, black man in his 30s. Immigrated to the United States 14 years ago, went to school in Nebraska, moved to Minnesota 2012. IT guy, lives with his wife and a dog, speaks multiple language, French and others. Learning he was in the jury pool, he was surprised and anxious, but realized it's his civic duty. He said while relating to Floyd's death, he was thinking it could be anybody. It could have been you. He also said, I believe I will be impartial. He said he believes people have a right to protest, but at the same time, he realizes that businesses are shut down and damaged, and his wife is unable to make it to work. Ooh, so that's personal, right? That is personal. He wants to serve on the jury because it is a service to my community and to our country. And so again, it's a little bit of a personal impact from BLM or from some of the protests, or let's call it the unrest. If nobody wants to take credit for that, then you might say that maybe this is biasing him towards the defense. Maybe this is biasing him towards the police, the people who restore order. I'm not so sure that I would go that far, because this is kind of neutral. He says he was surprised and anxious about this. I think he's going to be maybe subject to some outer disposition, some outer influence, in order to calm some of that anxiety. So who knows? This guy could go either way. So I'm going to go ahead and put him in the conviction category. He would be voting for guilty if I had to take a guess. All right, so we're going to go over to juror number 5. This is a white woman in her 50s. She's a single mother who works as a high-level executive at a nonprofit sector focused on healthcare. Interesting. So healthcare is going to be a big issue here. She took the unusual step of summoning her own attorney to the courthouse. At one point, the judge halted the live video feed and cleared the courtroom of everyone except trial participants out of unspecified privacy concerns. The woman said the bystander video left her with a somewhat negative view of Chauvin, explaining that, quote, "A man died. I'm not sure that that's procedure. Not all police are bad, but that bad behavior police need to go." At the same time, she acknowledged sympathy for Floyd and the officers at the scene that night, saying, "Everyone's lives are changed by this incident, and it's not easy for anyone." And so I read that statement to be a little bit more, I would say, in alignment with Derek Chauvin, right? It's not easy for anyone. Okay, we already know it's not easy for Floyd, for his family, for the community, for people who have been subject to the oppression of the justice system, and on and on and on. When you say, well, we know it's not easy for you, but it's also it's not easy for anyone. It's everybody involved, the police, which I think is an accurate statement, right? This is a tragedy all around, in my opinion. And if I had to guess on this woman, just because of some of her demographics, because she brought her own attorney, she's somebody who in my mind looks like she's a mover and groover, somebody who, accomplishes a lot, is sort of a high-level executive in healthcare, likes law and order. I would just guess, based on her age and demographics and her sort of social status, that she's more conservative. And that, combined with the fact that she said that, not all police are bad, but the bad police need to go, also juxtaposed with everyone's lives are changed by this incident, I think she's an acquittal. So she gets the red circle, not guilty, for juror number 5. Healthcare, nonprofit, single mother, high-level executive. Going to give her a not guilty. Next up, we got juror number 6, black man in his 30s. And you can see here, the information is sort of dwindling a little bit. He said that he has seen a bystander's video of the arrest. He says, "I don't think Chauvin had any intention of harming anybody, but somebody did die." When pressed about assessing Chauvin's intent, the man said he could still definitely look at the case from an objective point of view. And so I don't think he had any intention of harming anybody, but somebody did die. And so when you read that, I think this sort of breaks out into the 3 different charges that Chauvin is facing. Couple murder charges plus the manslaughter charge. It sounds like what he's doing right there is sort of splitting the difference. He's saying, well, if there's a charge on there, if they get the jury instructions and they're looking at the different charges that they have to choose from, this guy might say, well, no, that says intent, or he intended to kill him. That says intent. This one says, no, he was just negligent. But somebody did die. So it's sort of splitting down the middle. Maybe this guy's a not guilty on the murder charges, but he's a guilty on the manslaughter charges. And so we're going to give him a conviction. And juror number 6, as you can see here, he gets the green check box. Next up is juror number 7, a white woman in her 50s. She lives outside Minneapolis, works as an executive assistant in clinical healthcare settings. So another healthcare professional said that she has viewed the bystanders video, wrote in her questionnaire filled out months ago. "I couldn't watch it in full. It was too disturbing to me." Then she pledged, "I'm not in a position to change the law. I'm in a position to uphold the law. He's innocent until we can prove otherwise." Interesting. So she works in a clinical healthcare setting. She's an executive assistant. So maybe she doesn't have too much, I would say, input on, or knowledge about actual healthcare protocol or any of the inner workings of how this stuff works. Is she going to have any insight into a toxicology report, for example? I'm not so sure. Couldn't watch it in full. It was too disturbing to me, which is, I would say, that's certainly leans towards the prosecution, right? Because it's such an emotional reaction from this woman. She's so just disgusted by what she saw, so disturbed. But then she says, "I'm not in a position to change the law, and I'm in a position to uphold the law, and he's innocent until proven otherwise." And so she's sort of jumping into the presumption of innocence. And so that, juxtaposed with her clinical healthcare settings, the fact that she hasn't seen the video yet is a little bit worrisome. I think this woman might be able to go sort of 50-50. But we just can't tell. So what did I give her? Let's see here. It looks like I gave her a not guilty. So juror number 7, I gave her a not guilty here. And I think that the reason I did that was sort of because this presumption of innocence. She said that, very specifically. So unless they can prove otherwise, I think she's kind of deciding on the error of, well, it's the government's burden. It's their burden to prove the case beyond that reasonable doubt standard. Are they going to be able to do that? If she really sticks true to that, I think there's enough reasonable doubt here, and this is sort of my input, that if she sticks to this standard, I think it might be hard for her to actually convict Derek Chauvin. So I gave her a not guilty. Next up, we got jurors number 8 and number 9. Black man in his 40s. Juror number 8 is somebody who believes minorities are often arrested, but disagrees with the concept of defunding law enforcement. This is a black man. Says, the police do a lot. I would trust the police. Then we have juror number 9, a multi-race woman in her 40s. She's an organizational consultant who helps corporations improve personnel practices and efficiencies. She is married with a son, said she spends a lot of time at ice hockey arenas. Asked about the settlement, she said it wouldn't impact her. I don't think that declares guilt one way or the other, she said. All right, so how do we hold up on these two? So for this gentleman here, number 8, because he said, I would trust the police, I don't support defunding law enforcement. The police do a lot. I would trust the police. So he's going to get, of course, an acquittal. A not guilty here. So this is the red not guilty. I think he goes in the acquittal category. Then we have the juror number 9, personnel practices. Asked about the settlement, said it wouldn't impact her. Organizational consultant. Doesn't think that it declares guilt one way or the other. So because this is sort of neutral, I went and put her as a conviction. So we have number 9, who is a conviction. Next up, we got 10 and 11. Number 10 is a white woman in her 50s. She works as a nurse, another medical person. She lives in Adena. She assured the court she would judge the evidence fairly despite having seen portions of the viral video of the arrest and after hearing about the settlement. So she's heard on both. The woman said her professional training, of course, would affect how she would look at the evidence. Quote, we use all our life experiences to make judgments. She said, in which her work included resuscitating patients in urgent situations and dispensing opiates while on the job in the case of an overdose. The judge interjected and pointed out that she can't be an expert witness. And she said, yeah, I know about that. I can't do that. Then we have juror number 11, a black woman in her 60s, grandmother, retired marketing professor, a professional, volunteers helping children in need with their homework. She started watching the video and just stopped after 4 to 5 minutes. It wasn't something I needed to see, she said. She's also not formed opinions about either Chauvin or Floyd and was firm in saying news of the settlement would not affect her commitment to being an objective juror. So obviously saw portions of the video, was not happy about what she saw, turned it off after 4 to 5 minutes. Also is sort of pretty neutral aside from that statement. I mean, I think most people watched it and were not happy with what they saw, of course. And so she is in that category. And because the rest of her opinion is neutral, gave her a conviction. So number 11 here is a conviction. We have a green checkbox here. And number 10, we gave an acquittal. And this is because I think she's a nurse. She is regularly around other people who have opiates in their system. It sounds like she's maybe even has some experience resuscitating people who've been in similar situations. And so I think that, her experience here might lean towards her sort of recognizing a drug overdose happening right in front of her. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's what the defense argument is going to be. It had nothing to do with Chauvin's knee on the neck. It had everything to do with a drug overdose based on last-minute attempts to conceal the drugs through ingestion. And if the defense makes that claim and she has seen people who are basically, overdosing in front of her, she did some work resuscitating these people. This is all hypothetical. And she, helped dispense opiates so that people weren't having withdrawals, and she's been, giving those things out for pain management and stuff. I think she's probably pretty familiar with how this stuff works. And so if the defense can capture her imagination on that and show her how this whole thing worked, how their theory of the case is more probable than the government's theory of the case, I think that she actually may be a not guilty. And so we gave her the acquittal red circle. Next up, we've got 12 and 13. A white woman in her 40s, number 12, lives in the suburbs, works in insurance. Like others, she has viewed the bystander video, was aware of the settlement, but said that would not stop her from being fair and objective. She wrote in her juror questionnaire months ago that she didn't believe Floyd deserved to die and police didn't need to use excessive force. So kind of splitting it down the middle. However, she continued, Floyd was not completely innocent. She said she has generally positive views of the police and opposes any defunding of their departments, but also believe people of other races get treated unfairly by law enforcement. That one's pretty easy. Gave her a a not guilty, an acquittal on that one. Next up, we have number 13, white woman in her 50s. She worked in customer service and said she's an animal lover, especially dogs. She saw the bystander video of Floyd's arrest and wrote in her juror questionnaire months ago. The restraint was ultimately responsible for Mr. Floyd's demise. So she's blaming the knee on the neck for the death. That said, she pledged under defense scrutiny she could presume Chauvin innocent as the law requires her to do. So for her, we gave her, of course, a conviction, said that the knee is ultimately responsible for the death, and that, even though that she said that I can be innocent until proven otherwise, well, that one statement, I think, supersedes that. And in any event, the tie goes to the conviction. And so number 13 gets the conviction. Next up, we have our last two, number 14s and number 15. Number 14 is a white woman in her 20s, newlywed social worker in Wright County, whose clients are coping with mental health difficulties, more healthcare stuff. She was unwavering in her confidence that she could judge only the evidence presented in the trial, and added that her profession has provided her with the ability to be empathetic and keep an open mind about people. Right. And so you can imagine here that if she was if she was viewing this through the lens of Derek Chauvin, she's somebody who deals with people that have mental health problems. Maybe she's got some training that says, hey, you're not supposed to put your knee on their neck for 9 minutes, brother. Can't do that. And so maybe that might lead her to be more disposed to side with the government in viewing Chauvin's behavior as unacceptable, as improper, as outside of protocol. And then she would use that and sort of internalize that, say, I would have handled this differently. This is how it should have been handled. And that is, not far off from culpable negligence in the minds of non-attorneys when they're back there in the deliberation room. So we'll see where that goes. Lastly, juror number 15, probably not going to be sticking around anyways, but he's an accountant. He's married, said he is analytical thanks to his profession, and he could weigh the evidence fairly. He understands why athletes kneel during the national anthem to protest racial injustice. He wishes they would do so in a different manner. I think it's more of a respect to those that have come before us and the system that we have in the U.S. I have a great sense of pride in being a citizen. He said he has a neutral opinion of Floyd and a generally favorable view of BLM. He believes that it was a contributing factor in the violent unrest that followed Floyd's death. So this guy, I think, would be a hard acquittal on this, a not guilty. And so he gets the red circle. Number 14 would be a conviction, in my opinion. So she gets a green check mark. And this is that's the breakdown of it. So let's take a quick look at this. Let's break this down. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 not guilties, which means we've got 8 guilties. And this guy's going away, so we'll call it 6 not guilties and 8 guilties. Kind of even right now, right? And we also are looking at pretty even in terms of the racial demographics. The only thing that is not particularly even, there's a lot of women on this jury. Sorry, boys, you're not on this panel. All right, so that is it for the jury. I think we got them picked. Let's take some questions over from locals.com. Once again, these questions come from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Go on over there, support the show, ask a question, meet some amazing people, and let's start here with liberty or death. See if we got a couple. Hey, it's working. So liberty or death says, I've not done any research on Judge Cahill. I'll run him through Lexis and Westlaw tonight, but I can just say from looking at his conduct that I do not know his political leanings, and it seems he just cares about the law, which is the kind of judge that I like. And I totally agree with that, liberty or death. I can't tell one way or the other, which is really good. And usually when you watch somebody enough and you get some sort of opinions and you watch their facial expressions, although now the facial expression is hard to see. You can't see it because he's got his mask on the entire time. And have you looked at his mask, by the way? Judge Cahill is a serious hombre. His mask looks like it's like custom made. It's like fitted to the whole thing. I mean, it's like leather. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful work of art. And I'm not a mask connoisseur by any stretch of the imagination. But my point here is this guy is just like clockwork. And he's running a very clean trial. I mean, it's hard to digest one way or the other which way he's leaning, because I don't think he's leaning any way. He's been very even-handed to both sides, which is welcoming. I'm appreciative of that. Woodworking Medic says, do you think that the jurors actually mean what they say? Being fair and impartial is extremely difficult when the entire city seems to be up in arms. I'm concerned that Chauvin will be convicted just to please the public, even if the defense proves a solid case. Yeah, I mean, I think jurors mean what they say, and I think that they believe what they say. I mean, I truly think that. I think that jurors oftentimes say, yeah, I'm a fair person. I mean, most people think that they're fair people. Most people think that they would be a great juror. Hey, I can listen to facts. I can digest a huge array of information. I can consolidate that down. I'm a fair person, and I can give a fair, opinion. In reality, I just don't think that's the reality. I mean, ultimately, I think that many people are highly persuadable. They are very subject to influence. They don't perform particularly well in a jury panel where you've got, let's say 11 other people in there that are all, duking this thing out in one of the most important moments of their lives. People sort of, fall under pressure. People do things for ulterior motives. There's a lot of issues with this. It's not a perfect system, but it's the best system that we've got. And I agree with you there, Woodworking Medic, that there are some concerns about this. It's not going to be a perfect trial. He's never going to get, I would say a totally fair and impartial trial. And many people would say that George Floyd will never get the justice that he wants either. And so both sides of this aisle, I think, are unhappy with the process. Many people say Derek Chauvin will never get a fair trial. Other people say that the trial will be rigged, and even if he's convicted on all 3 counts. In fact, we were talking with somebody about this in Clubhouse last night, sort of trying to understand what the ideal version of justice would look like in today's world in 2021. And it's much more expansive than this one particular trial. People are talking about this as just the beginning, the opening salvo, the beginning conversation about what we can do to reform our justice system. And so, you're not going to see people, I think, on either side who are going to be particularly happy about it. But this is the system that we've got. It's pretty damn good relative to a lot of other systems throughout the world. And I got to tell you, this one, I'm looking for things to complain about, and I'm having a hard time doing it. This judge is doing a very nice job. Of course, there's been some undue influence from a lot of people. City council, for example, that was a boneheaded decision any way you slice it. I think if you're on the prosecution side, even they're going, and we heard that from Steve Schleicher. Now, not from a policy perspective, from a citizen's perspective. You might think that was perfectly reasonable to issue a settlement in the middle of voir dire, may not even care. Just say, hey, justice here is more important than that justice that's happening over there, whatever, right? You can have a reasonable disagreement about that. But I think even the prosecutor here in this case was looking at that going, are you serious? Because now they got to defend a change of venue. Now they got to defend a motion to continue. Now they got to have discussions about the additional peremptory strikes and so on. And so the judge, even though there's these externalities that are causing some bias and some influence in this trial, the judge is doing a very nice job of mitigating that. And I mean, it's to his credit. It's something that is very commendable. And so you're going to have a hard time, unless this judge goes off the rails down the road. But I think this guy is very, very solid. And I think both sides are going to get as fair a shake as humanly possible with this judge. I haven't seen a judge or anything wrong with this judge that would cause my opinion to sort of deviate currently. All right, next up, News Now Wyoming says, how often do you have clients as involved in the trial as Chauvin is? Just watching court TV versus other trials, he seems extremely involved compared to what we see. Well, yeah, News Now. I mean, I'm not sure that I agree with that just off, sort of necessarily. I mean, he's there. He should be there. This is every day of his trial. Every defendant in any trial like this is going to be there. I mean, if we have a felony trial for anything, our client is sitting there with us every single day of the trial. And yeah, they get a notepad and a pen, and they're told to look busy, like they care and they're interested in this stuff. So, of course, you're going to get up, you're going to talk about jury selection. Really, Derek Chauvin has just kind of been sitting there, just kind of, doodling notes or writing notes or whatever. I was sort of joking. He's writing his grocery list, the thing, because what's he going to do? You're just going through the motions. He can't get up there and ask the juror questions. Ultimately, a lot of this stuff is sort of out of his control, even out of the defense attorney's control. They're going to try to control, it's like an explosion going off, and they're just trying to contain the blast zone in certain areas, and they're doing their best to tread water, and that's what they're doing. And most defendants will do that. I mean, this is not what I've seen from Chauvin is not out of the ordinary. Ryan says, someone claiming to be in favor of Black Lives Matter but against Blue Lives Matter, or describing it as unnecessarily as unnecessary is logically incoherent. Our entire legal system is predicated on the realization that all human life is afforded freedom and prosperity. For example, all lives matter, which includes blue lives and black lives. How is it that someone exhibiting such cognitive dissonance can be trusted to be of sound reasoning to be on a jury? Well, Ryan, I understand your argument. It's a very nuanced sort of position there. And I think that your argument makes sense to me. I think you'd have other people who would just say that they're not mutually exclusive, or they're not naturally incompatible with one another. And you can have a lot of arguments about this. I mean, we're having this conversation every day in this country about, white supremacy, the male patriarchy, all this stuff, right? Woke language, woke culture, and how all of these things interface with one another. I'm not real sure how it all works, quite frankly. I'm not sure that the judge does either. And so, what this person was doing, in my opinion, is they're doing the balancing act. They're on that balance beam going, uh-oh, which way am I going to go? They want to make some positive statements in favor of BLM. Then they're going to go, oh, shoot, that's too much in favor of the prosecution. So now I got to say, oh, blue lives matter too, right? And so that's okay for the defense. And so they're just trying to balance it out. I think that's really what it comes down to. If you asked anybody in this country to sort of, hey, can you please identify the logical inconsistencies between Blue Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, you'd go, oh gosh, that is a deep philosophical question. I think it's hard to define even those terms. I mean, I think that even the terms Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter have been so manipulated and sort of reclaimed for their own purposes that it's hard to even tell what we're talking about anymore. So I think the judge just said, all right, that sounds impartial. You're good. And that's what we get. That's what we can get. You can't go in and ask everybody or get into a deep dive logically and say, well, here's why your argument is a logical fallacy. Get the hell out of here. They're not going to do that with every juror. They're going to allow them to express themselves as long as they can set aside their predispositions, their predisposed beliefs, and act fair and impartially. That's good enough for the system. Farmer's daughter said, I found it disrespectful to put a George Floyd memorial in the Holocaust Museum. There's no comparison to what happened to him compared to genocide. Do you have an opinion on that? Good question, Farmer's daughter. So I didn't even know that was a thing, that they put the George Floyd memorial in the Holocaust Museum. I mean, before I commented on that, I would certainly want to know what the context there is. I mean, is it a World War II Holocaust Museum? Because that seems not on message. Now, if you want to put it in, the civil rights wing of that museum somewhere, if it's got wings and stuff, that's a whole different ballgame, and I might be able to see how that's justified, because this is a civil rights issue, whether you agree with that or not. I mean, a lot of people in this country consider it to be that, and this is sort of the linchpin on that conversation. This is so important because it's symbolic of civil rights, whether you agree with that or not. Many people in this country interpret that. We have Anki Woe says, doesn't referring to the case as the trial of Derek Chauvin and the killing of George Floyd presumes Chauvin is guilty. Yeah, I think you can make that argument. I think in the killing of George Floyd, yes, it sounds like Derek Chauvin is killing George Floyd, but you could say maybe the death of George Floyd. I think whether he killed him is still up for debate and hasn't been determined yet. If I use that language, I apologize. If it's a lot of this stuff we just use colloquially, but legally, yeah, you're right. If you said, Derek Chauvin allegedly killed George Floyd, that might be better. The trial of Derek Chauvin and the alleged killing of George Floyd, I think that would be more legally correct. All right, Ma Fox says, I think we're forgetting that this is about manslaughter charges too. This doesn't necessarily require that Chauvin was the cause of death, but the officers, which knew Floyd was likely on drugs and experiencing an overdose. I've seen two officers say this that were at the scene, one of which told the other two that were on Floyd that he was experiencing symptoms of overdose and that they should cease restraining him. That's ultimately what's up in the air for me. Former officers Lane and Thao told the investigators this on the scene. Former officer Thao also said that there was no training he ever received to use knee restraint post handcuffs being on the subject. Yeah. It's a great point. I mean, these are great points. And I think what we're going to see here is there's going to be just a timeline of events. And so I watched the body camera video and I recall them talking about delirium or excited delirium or something to that effect. But I don't know where it fell in the timeline. And so the government is going to produce a timeline on this, and the defense is going to produce a timeline, and they're just going to go through at every point in the timeline. And then when we're talking about the manslaughter charges, I think what the government is ultimately going to try to argue or try to do is shift the responsibility over to Chauvin to say, at some point in time, you should have done something else. The fact that you did not do that resulted in George Floyd's death. So it's a negligence argument. And you might be exactly right. You might be 100% right. And this is where this might split down the middle. Not guilty on the murders, guilty on the manslaughters because of the failure to preserve life, essentially. It's going to be a good question. And, I'm not sure. I think we were talking about this yesterday in Clubhouse, Ma, where we were talking about, the pulse, the beats per minute, and whether they should have known or whether they did in fact know that he was on drugs or that he was overdosing. Again, I think that changes the equation. If somebody told Derek Chauvin while he's laying on the ground, hey man, he's overdosing right now and he's dying. If another cop did that and Chauvin said, thanks, mind your business, buddy. I'm just going to stay here with my knee on his neck. Leave me alone. Right? That would be a catastrophic problem, I would think. Because at that point in time, we know that he is deteriorating right in front of us. Failure to act or provide that medical care combined with restraining him, I think is where you get that problem. But I'm not sure that I've seen the evidence of that yet, that Chauvin did in fact know about this. He could presume it, and he could make an argument that he was dealing with a volatile, hostile crowd around him, and he had no choice but to maintain his position, to secure the perimeter, keep priority on his mission. They had a subject who may or may not be dangerous in custody. He was not able to get up off of him and go secure the crowd or anything like that. I mean, these are the arguments that the police are going to make. Whether they're good or not, it's going to be up to the jury to decide. But ultimately, they're the fact finders. They're going to be the deciders on this. Good question, Ma. And I think this is going to be one of those issues that's going to be really fleshed out in front of us for all eyes to see. I think you're going to see very clear timelines from both sides. Liberty or Death says, any word if the other officers are set to testify against Chauvin? I haven't seen anything to that effect. I would guess that the answer is not, because here's why. If they testify against Chauvin, so two things could happen. One, they could testify against Chauvin. Chauvin's convicted. His conviction is sort of the predicate for their convictions or for their charges because of the fact that they're basically assisting in, I think all of their charges are the assisting, aiding and abetting or whatever they were. So if Chauvin is convicted, then that makes it more likely that they'll be convicted. So they don't really have a strong interest in helping the government to secure that conviction. Instead, it's more about, I think, uniformity. They have strength in numbers. If all three of the other cops can say, look, listen, Chauvin didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. This was all policy. This was all procedure. Get bent, right? There's nothing, we didn't do anything wrong. Then that is a stronger defense than one of the officers breaking ranks and going and supporting Chauvin and saying, yeah, I told him. And what's going to be the benefit for that officer? Are they going to get a sweetheart plea deal? Are they going to get their charges dismissed in exchange for testifying against the other two? I'm not sure that that's in their interest to try to do that. So I haven't seen it yet, but I haven't really checked. I just have sort of presumed that that's not going to be happening. Sisha's in the house, says, hi, Rob, Miss Faith, and Ma. First of all, I love how I'm not limited to my word count. This is going to be such a difficult case. Any decision is still going to cause some sort of an uproar. I hope the jurors are not harassed during this trial as usual. Keep up the good work, Rob and team. Thank you, Sisha. Appreciate you being here. And thanks for that support. Totally agree with you. It's just going to be a difficult trial. It's tumultuous for, I think, everybody involved. And we wish everybody well, especially the jurors, especially all of the attorneys working on the case, especially the judge, because they're in for a rough couple weeks starting on Monday. Next up, we got Sliding Edge said, this show today is packed full of meaningful content. Excellent breakdown. Barnes should tip his hat to you. That comes from Sliding Edge. Well, I tip my hat to Mr. Barnes. Very astute individual. Had a good time going on their show a couple days ago. So go check that out. What was that, last week? Yeah, last Wednesday. So go check that out on Viva Frey's channel if you missed that. And thank you for that, Sliding Edge. We have Feisty Lady said, the two female jurors who said they couldn't watch the bystander video seem very concerning. Won't they have to view the whole bystander video during the trial? And I could see them carrying that emotion into the deliberation room. Yeah, I agree with that, Feisty Lady. Yes, I think that they're going to see the video. They're going to see multiple videos. They're going to see multiple body camera videos. They're going to see this happen probably a lot of times. Okay, many, many, many times. And so if you are somebody who just automatically has a revulsion to that, well, you're going to kind of naturally assign that blame to the person who's causing the situation that's leading to your revulsion. And if your revulsion is about Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck, well, who are you revolted against? That's going to be Derek Chauvin. Whether you like it or not, whether you watched it or not, you're going to have an instinctual reaction to that. And, even this goes to an earlier comment, when people are saying that they can set aside their biases and they can be impartial. Can you really? Once you've seen that, I mean, there's something that kind of leaves a mark on you. Unless you're somebody who just watches people die all the time. Maybe it's just another video. But for most of us, that's a human being whose life is disappearing right in front of our very eyes. Awful, terrible, terrible thing to see and watch. Right? It's sort of, would you show your child that? No. Why? Because it's traumatic. It leaves a mark. It will change certain people in this country. And it's hard to unring that bell. Now, the question still becomes, can you set that aside and process the case properly, using logic, using reason, setting aside that emotional, guttural reaction that you feel in favor of using your other faculties? It's difficult to separate the two. We'll see where it goes. We got Kelly D. Stu says, how many jurors did they need to convict? And could it be a lesser crime like involuntary manslaughter? So good question. There is a manslaughter charge in there. You kind of got good question, Kelly Stu. You got kind of two questions wrapped up into here. Jurors in Minneapolis, my understanding, it's unanimous. So if it is not, if it's not a unanimous decision, it's a hung jury. I'm not real sure that the judge is going to let this be a hung jury. My understanding is he's going to sequester them once they go in for deliberations, and who knows how long deliberations go. So if the jury comes back and they're split, maybe they split according to my numbers. Maybe it's 8 in favor of a conviction, 6 in favor of an acquittal, or at that point it would be 12. So it would be 4 who would be in favor of an acquittal. Let's just kind of run those numbers. It seems they would have to convict. If they came back and split down the middle, the judge would say, go back, figure it out. You have to go back to deliberation. I'm not going to let you do that. Right? It's not going to be a hung jury. So if you want to sit here for another 2 weeks, that's fine. Go back there though. So I'm not sure that they're going to allow them out until there is a unanimous verdict one way or the other. Deliberate until we get an answer. Next question is about lesser included crimes. And so I'm not, so the concept of a lesser included crime is usually fleshed out during jury questioning, we just did jury questioning, voir dire. It's during jury instruction. So at the conclusion of the trial or nearing the conclusion of the trial, the jury is going to get instructions about how they can interpret all of this stuff. And we're going to go into that a little bit further, but the concept of lesser included crimes is saying, all right, well, if it's sort of giving the jury instructions that if you don't like these 3 charges, maybe there's something else in here that you like, something else that wasn't charged that maybe you can consider that you think is more appropriate. And traditionally that type of stuff is not part of the conversation. The jury just gets delivered what the charges are, and they get to decide on those 3 charges. Sometimes what you'll have is prosecutors or defense attorneys trying to get in the lesser included instruction so that the jurors can also say, all right, we got murder 1, murder 2, manslaughter, involuntary, whatever. And there's another range of potential criminality charges, and the jury wouldn't ordinarily see them, but you read it into the jury instructions so that they can pick. They can say, well, we kind of like these other charges better. That's kind of, I'm explaining this poorly, but this is kind of the general overview of the lesser included crimes. And we are going to go through the jury instructions. I just haven't done that yet because they haven't been settled. My understanding is they're still sort of hashing this stuff out back and forth. The last I saw was that the government submitted a response to the defense attempts to flesh out some of the rules. The government didn't like those attempts, and so they're still hashing it out. Once we get some more guidance from the judge, we'll cover it here on the show. We got Anki Woe says, could timing of the settlement be to see if there is any appeasement of the riots? If not, then more understanding that no actions will make any difference. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that, the settlement necessarily relates to the riots, because I don't know that there were any threats at this moment in time about riots, or that there was any sort of quid pro quo going on here where the city council said, hey, we'll just pay $27 million as long as you all settle down over there. And I haven't seen any evidence of that, but certainly I think that you can question the timing of the settlement, just given the fact that it happened right in the middle of jury selection. And previously, we know that when they settled the Noir case, they released information about the settlement the same day as the verdict in the trial. So they know how to do it appropriately. They just didn't in this case. All right, next up, we got Want to Know. It says, since it only takes one not guilty to cause a mistrial, how many mistrials, I think that's what you're asking, how many mistrials can you have? And so, I think indefinite. You can just kind of keep going. There's a different standard. So I've never appealed a mistrial or worked on anything like that. But my understanding is there's this concept called manifest necessity. And so ordinarily you would not get a second trial, but they have this manifest necessity rule that is explaining that if the court can find a reason why you have to have a new trial in the case of, let's say, you don't get a verdict, you don't get a final conclusion, an acquittal or a not guilty, the law wants a final disposition. So if you don't get that, and the basis of that is not because the judge did something wrong, or the basis is not because the prosecutor violated your rights, if it's just simply because the jury couldn't decide, well, then they say that's kind of not a good reason to attach jeopardy to make it so that person cannot be charged again. We're just going to try him again. And so as long as they can show that and meet that standard every time, I'm not sure that there is a limit on that. Now, at some point, somebody, the defense would raise up a due process argument, a double jeopardy argument. So you can make arguments about that all day. And then you could also see fatigue from the prosecutor's office, right? If they try once, it's a hung jury. They try again, it's a hung jury. You go, okay, well, now you're trying again. You're just jury shopping at this point. You're just trying to find jurors who are going to convict my client. This is a due process violation. This is a double jeopardy problem. You can't keep doing this anymore, right? You can't just keep impaneling jurors until it's the end of the day. Go 100 times until you finally secure a conviction. Are you out of your mind? That is a constitutional problem. So you have that on that end. You have that argument, but then you also have prosecutors who, if they get a hung jury in this case, let's say they try Chauvin again, they get another hung jury. That would be a big problem. It would clearly show that their case is weak. You have enough people who do not believe that there is enough evidence to prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, as has been evidenced by two juries at this point. And so you'd have a little bit of public backlash as well. And so some of these prosecutions fizzle out for that reason. It just doesn't look good to keep trying the same case and losing over and over again. All right, next up, we got Joe Snow says, how about No Lives Matter? BLM trademark is a terrorist organization using violence and reputation of violence to intimidate us into political change. Blue lives don't exist since blue is a profession. If I can't profess a distinct significance of white lives, why should anybody expect a pass of any other color of life? I know, Joe, it's so confusing. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. I don't even know. Everybody's divided into these groups, blue and black. And, now we've got every single category of people. I can't keep track of them. It's too complicated. So really, I just kind of don't play. I want to talk about solutions. If BLM likes some of the solutions that I like, okay, we can work on that. But if not, I don't even know what their solutions are. So it's hard to tell. We got Woodworking Medic says, what do you think the chances are of a mistrial? If a mistrial happens, how do you think the city and courts will proceed? Well, I think they would try him again. I think it's pretty low. I think a mistrial is pretty low, honestly. This judge is very conservative. He's very cautious. I haven't heard anything from the jurors. I haven't seen anything that would knock this thing off the rails. Absent something anomalous, like, a car accident or somebody, whatever. Hopefully none of that happens, right? We're praying that this thing just goes smoothly, because any problems are going to be exploited by both sides. We don't want that to happen. All right, we got Macabre 8519 says, realistically, how likely is it that the jurors were honest in their questionnaire responses? There's an eventual financial incentive to be in this jury. I think that's a good point. And I think there's some also pretty good disincentives to being on this jury. It kind of depends on how it goes, right? What if he's convicted and all of these people come out, yeah, social justice and, justice for George and on and on and on, which is, I don't disagree with a lot of that stuff. I want criminal justice reform. I've been very much like a broken record on this show talking about justice reform. But that gets you the book deals, right? That gets you the TV shows and the interviews. Tell me what it was like. What was it like to be on that jury? Oh my God, Susan, it was so ridiculous. You have no idea. I mean, okay, we got it. Yeah, I know. Thanks for sharing your story with us. Here's your 15 minutes. Move on. Otherwise, what happens if this is an acquittal? You think those people are going on Good Morning America or whatever to talk about this? Hey, Barbara, the reason why we acquitted this was because we looked at the toxicology reports and it said 11 nanograms per milliliter. Can you believe that? Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think the media is going to accept that? Or are these people going to be just skewered? So, I can see some financial incentives. I can see some very strong disincentives for being on the jury panel. How honest were the jurors? I mean, I'll tell you, if I got one of these messages, I'd be brutally honest. Verbatim. Here you go. I'd be as honest as hell. Here you go. These are my thoughts. If you have other questions, we go live every day at 4 p.m. Arizona time. Come check it out. Ask a question on locals.com. I'll answer it for you, Judge. All right, next up, we got Woodworking Medic says, Robert, have you seen anything this far that can be considered a Brady violation that the defense could use if Chauvin is convicted? Good question. So a Brady violation is typically, it's some sort of misconduct. It's malfeasance. It's personnel problems. It's lying, dishonesty. It's fraud. It's basically anything that's in the government's possession that you should know as a defendant or as a defense lawyer. So, let's use a DUI example. If you are stopped and arrested for DUI, and the blood results come back and your blood is over the legal limit. That's not good. But the officer who drew your blood is under investigation from the Internal Affairs Division for lying on official police reports. Okay, well, you don't know that. You're just a regular person who's driving home for work and got stopped for a DUI. The officer knows he's under investigation. The prosecutor who's in control of the government's evidence also knows he's under investigation, and they've got a duty to disclose that to the defense. They have to tell you about some of this stuff. Anything that's exculpatory information is the legal phrase. Anything that tends to prove your innocence or might show or give you some supporting arguments that support your innocence because the government is in possession of that. They have the file. It's their file. They run the police department. They have all the investigators. They have a duty to give that stuff to the defense. So the question is, from Woodworking Medic, have we seen anything that the government has not disclosed to the defense that they should have disclosed? And I have not seen anything. No, I haven't seen anything. And I'm trying to think off the cuff whether there really is anything. It would be surrounding the investigation. If there were people involved in the investigation that did something wrong, or if there's anything that's exculpatory, anything that would tend to show Chauvin's innocence, if they did not disclose that, that would be a big problem. So if they didn't disclose, let's say they did an investigation into the back of the car, apparently, allegedly, they found a pill with George Floyd's DNA and his saliva on it, all right, in the back of the police vehicle. So if they would have kept that and not disclosed that to the defense, yeah, that would have been a Brady violation. But I'm guessing that they have because Eric Nelson was talking about it. Good question. But I haven't seen anything else that rings the bell for me. We have a farmer's daughter says, here is a sentence from an article describing the memorial. A new exhibit at a Holocaust museum in Maitland, Florida, is the latest among many attempts to universalize the genocide of the Jews at the hands of the Nazis. A new exhibit uses George Floyd to universalize the Holocaust. Wow. A new exhibit at the Holocaust Museum in Maitland, Florida, is the latest among many attempts to universalize the genocide of the Jews at the hands of the Nazis. The exhibit features photographs taken in the wake of the May 25th killing of George Floyd by white, now former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, whose colleagues stood motionless as he cruelly suffocated the subdued 46-year-old. All right, well, so I guess there's that going on. So I've never heard of this concept of universalizing the genocide of the Jews. That's a thing, apparently, where they're trying to make this equivalence, apparently, between that. I mean, I guess they could just have a museum of bad things, I guess. Just a museum of bad things that happened. Not anything specific, Holocaust over here, George Floyd over here, Columbine in this corner. I don't know. Seems kind of silly to me, but I'm not I don't even know what to make of it, if I can be honest. Next up, we got Sliding Edge says, what are the chances that the settlement fuels civil unrest in light of an acquittal in this trial? The settlement fuels civil unrest. So I'm not sure that the settlement would fuel the civil unrest. So yeah, you sort of have this relationship between a settlement agreement, which is in the civil world, and then we've got criminal law, which is in criminal land. And the question I think would be, would anybody who was upset that Derek Chauvin was acquitted, who was not convicted, would they be satisfied? Would they be satiated from the settlement? So Chauvin gets off criminally, but the city pays large compensation in the terms of $27 million to the family civilly. Would that satisfy the anger throughout the country? I don't think so, even a little bit, because all the headlines are going to say Chauvin acquitted, Chauvin not guilty, no justice for George, and so on. Zuck's in the house says, what if jurors ignore the jury instruction? So it kind of depends on how this works. If they refuse to follow the instructions in the middle of deliberation and the judge finds out about it, he's going to correct that, and so there's a dialogue that happens back and forth. Oftentimes, you're probably going to see it in this trial. The judge will allow the jury to ask questions. And so the jurors will write these questions down. They'll come back out. They'll read the questions. They'll recall witnesses, or they'll ask the attorneys to address these questions, or the judge will just answer the questions. No, that's not a correct reading of the law. This is what that means. This is what that means, and so on. And so if that happens, then some of those things can be corrected and alleviated. But if there's a conviction and, down the road, we say that, hey, one juror was telling us to just ignore the jury instructions and to just convict him because they read somewhere that something else about somebody, that would be a big problem. And that would, I think, cause an appeal, cause what's called a petition for post-conviction relief, and basically a remand for a new trial down the line. So yeah, the jurors are not supposed to just ignore jury instructions. I mean, they're supposed to follow the law to the T. Osock71 says, Rob, big fan. So, hey, I'm a big fan of you there, Osock says, do you think there will be riots regardless of the outcome of the trial? I mean, if I was a betting man, yes, I would think so. I don't know to the extent that they will be, but I mean, I think we kind of have riots every night in this country now, right? I mean, what's going on in Portland these days? I don't know. Somebody's going to riot about something. So if I had to put money on it, yeah, they're going to be riots regardless. They're just probably going to be bigger than usual. Next, we have Hack Consulting says, I actually agree with the Floyd Memorial in the Holocaust Museum. The Holocaust started before neighbors were turned against neighbors, and thus the Floyd Memorial completes the circle of hate in causing genocide. It's all just like a beautiful puzzle coming together. All the pieces just falling into place. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to get bent out of shape about a museum with George Floyd in it. I understand that symbolically that this might be very, very insulting to certain demographics in this country. If everybody's saying everything is the same, that all atrocities are the same, that doesn't make sense to me. Just like people who try to make moral equivalency between all things in the world. Everything's morally equivalent. Oh, your pain is the same as my pain. Why? Oh, you went through this awful traumatic event and you did something else that is really kind of routine. And we're all supposed to just kind of treat everything equally because, well, that's their subjective feelings. Oh, well, who are you to tell them that they can't feel that way? That's their experience. How dare you? Well, all right. Okay, that's fine. They can have their experience. I don't have any obligation to communicate with that person or to have anything to do with that person or that ideology. And so if they want to live in their little bubble where, they are spun up about whatever the latest issue is, they're welcome to do that. But I think generally speaking, this type of stuff is just not equal. And you're trying to see, I think people are jockeying a little bit to make them equal because it sort of elevates their claim of victimhood or something. I don't know. I don't even know what the hell's going on, quite frankly. All right, so enough of that. All right, we're going to change gears a little bit because we've been going for an hour and we've got 2 other full segments to get to. Great questions, though. Everybody, thank you for those. Those came over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, so we're going to change gears. Yesterday, there was a big, massive shooting and another tragedy, unfortunately, that took place out of Boulder, Colorado. There was a gunman, age 21, who used an assault weapon, assault rifle, to shoot and kill 10 people. One of those individuals was a police officer. And so there's a lot of news coming out right now. This happened yesterday. We're sort of assembling all of this stuff together as we speak, but it's obviously a big deal. Anytime we have one of these shootings, hearts go out to the families. We're really sick of seeing this stuff in this country, tired of talking about them on this show, but it is what it is. And obviously I think this is indicative of a deeper problem in this country. The question is, what is the problem? And the question is, how do we deal with it? And so every time we see one of these tragedies happen, of course, you have people on one side of the aisle jumping up in arms raised, outraged about gun violence in this country. And the first thing they want to do is start banning guns, banning assault weapons, and sort of passing all of these draconian, in my opinion, laws that really, really hamper the Second Amendment, which is the Second Amendment for a reason. First one is speech. Second one's the right to bear arms. Pretty important. It's in that order for a reason. And when I start to see these calls, these claims that suddenly, we got to just modify the entire firearm apparatus in this country, starts to leave me a little bit concerned. And so we're going to go through this story in a couple different segments. We're going to talk about what happened. We're going to talk about the facts of the case. Of course, this guy got arrested. He's in custody right now. We're going to give you some of the details on it, but it is a fluid and changing situation. So some of this information may be subject to change. Do your own research if you want the latest information. We also are then going to talk about the response, which I think is also very important. Of course, we send our thoughts to the families, but what is this going to mean for the rest of the country? This always happens. Right now, we're in a little bit of a unique environment. We had a couple shootings back to back. We have Joe Biden, who's in charge of the White House. We have Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, in charge of the House of Representatives. We have Chuck Schumer, Democrat, who's in charge of the Senate. And they're all working right now to pass bills that are going to literally, in my opinion, infringe on your Second Amendment rights on the backs of this tragedy. They do this every time. It's reprehensible. It's disgusting behavior, but you never let a crisis go to waste. You always use it to maximum advantage. And they have already done that. So we're going to talk about the media response. We're going to talk about how this sort of shatters the narrative of what many people in the media were just primed up and ready to go. They had articles written about this was a Trump, MAGA, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, alt-righter. They were chomping, salivating at the bit to get this out in front of the country. Well, it turns out it wasn't a racist Trump white guy, right? It wasn't that. And so that whole narrative shifted. But that did not stop Joe Biden, did not stop Kamala Harris, has not stopped other Democratic representatives from already raising the specter of looming gun control measures that are going to be coming down the pike. It's coming soon. Just get ready for it. In fact, this Democratic congresswoman from Texas, congressperson, has said that they want to end the filibuster to solve this problem. So let's get into the story now that we've outlined it just a little bit. Here, we're going to dive in. This comes over from thedailymail.com. I like their bullet points over there. It says, gunman 21 with an AR-15 style rifle shoots and kills at least 10 people at a Boulder grocery store, including hero father of seven cop 51, who was the first to respond. Suspect arrested was 21-year-old Ahmad Alisa of Arvada, Colorado. 10 people were shot dead by him at a King Soopers grocery store in Boulder. Shooting happened 3 p.m. local time on Monday, so late yesterday afternoon. One of those killed was a hero cop, goes by the name of Eric Talley, father of 7, which is just horrendous. He was the first to respond to the scene. Rest in peace, Eric. 25-year-old Ricky Olds was identified on Tuesday morning as another victim of the 10 victims. Unclear if the others were killed, customers, staffs, or cops, or if they were randomly targeted. Harrowing photos and videos taken once the gunman had been arrested showed bodies strewn across the floor. Officials are expected to give an update at 8:30 this morning, and we got that today. The gunman responsible for the mass shooting, he's been identified as Ahmad Alisa, and I think that name is actually Ahmad Ali Isa, something like that. We're going to get the full name later. He has lived most of his life in the U.S. He's now in custody, charged with 10 counts of murder, opened fire yesterday, killing 10 people. Taken into custody at 3:28 p.m., so just short of an hour before the shooting started. He's now in stable condition. He's being treated for injuries, and his motive remains unknown. And so you may have seen this picture floating around the internet. This is him being hauled out. Police have still not yet confirmed that he was the man that was being seen led out of the grocery store. They include all of his victims have been identified. So let's say rest in peace to Denny Strong, Nevin Statinsky. We have Ricky Olds, Suzanne Fountain, Terry Liker, Officer Eric Talley. We have Kevin Mahoney, Lynn Murray, and Jody Waters. All rest in peace. We're sorry that to their families and their loved ones. Officials revealed at a press conference some of the victims were at their store to get their COVID-19 vaccine, which is just terrible. So here are some images of the aftermath. Of course, a lot of response from law enforcement, just mayhem, carnage, breaking through windows so that they can get a line of sight into the building, and just awful, horrendous scene. So this is some more background information before we dive into the response. Boulder shooting. Police identified the gunman, saying he's facing 10 murder charges. 10 people died. The victims ranged in age from 20 to 65. He's from a small city between Denver and Boulder called Arvada. He was wounded during the shooting. He's expected to be released from the hospital and sent to the county jail sometime on Tuesday, Boulder County District Attorney Michael Dougherty said. He said that the suspect's injury was a through-and-through wound to his leg. Ben Marcus of Colorado Public Radio reported that Elisa had a police record, having been arrested on a misdemeanor assault charge in 2018. He pled guilty and paid a fine to resolve that case, according to court records. So the court was aware of him. An extensive investigation is now underway into his life, Dougherty said. He added that the suspect has lived most of his life in the U.S., but did not elaborate on his history. The arrest warrant affidavit for Elisa says he purchased a gun less than a week before Monday's shooting, citing official databases that show he bought a Ruger AR-556 on March 16th. So Biden, of course, responds, says the U.S. flag was lowered to half staff on Wednesday on Tuesday afternoon in honor of the victims. He acknowledged that the inquiry is still in its early phases, but added, I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps. There it is. Always common sense that will save lives in the future, and urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. Biden said that he should once again ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines and close legal loopholes. So we're going to hear from Joe here in a second. Let's wrap up this story. FBI, ATF, other federal agencies are investigating. Michael Schneider, special agent in charge, said he's conducting interviews. He added that the effort is ongoing to determine what could have motivated the attack. As a teenager, he was on the high school wrestling team. Tyson Crosby, the boy of a father who competed against Anissa, said he remember him being nice but frustrated with life. Another person said, anger issues. I never expected to hear what I heard. That came as a complete shock. All right. So, as I said, terrible ordeal, just awful. And Joe Biden's already out there talking about, common sense gun reform. So it looks like this guy was already convicted of a crime. Sounds like it was just a misdemeanor, so he did not lose his right to possess firearms. Typically, when you're, I think anywhere in this country, I'm only licensed in Arizona and California. So when I speak, I'm sort of using that as my backdrop. But anywhere in this country, if you're convicted of a felony, you should lose your right to a firearm. That's something that just happens automatically here in Arizona and California. And so if you are in that position, you don't get to go and purchase that AR-15. That's already on the books. This guy, though, was not convicted of a felony from what I have just read there. It's actually a misdemeanor, and it's an assault case. There are some special provisions for domestic violence charges, so that if you are involved in a domestic situation, then typically you'll get your firearm rights revoked for those types of incidents. And there is some ambiguity on that between federal law and state law. So take that with a grain of salt. There's more that goes into that story. But my point here is that this guy just simply did not have any holds on him, apparently. So he was able to purchase a firearm. We know what happened next. Terrible story. Now, I will show you something I came across that this agitates me so badly. But this woman, her name is Amy Siskind. She is an activist, a feminist, an author. She is the Weekly List website. She's got a podcast. She's got a book. She's got 500,000 followers. Okay, 500,000 people. It's a big number on Twitter. That's a lot of people. AmySiskin.com. She apparently was involved in Politico 50. I don't know if she was writing the Politico 50 or if she was on the list of Politico 50, but these are the 50 people who are sort of most responsible for moving the political narrative forward. She's got a lot of activism here, former Wall Street executive, got her pronouns listed here, AmySiskin.com, big following. And, the first thing that came out of everybody's mouths yesterday, it was, this was obviously a white male. Obviously, right? That's sort of where everybody jumps to. And it's very interesting how people's response to that will shift. So if they think it's a white male, then they have one opinion, but if it's not a white male, then they have a whole different opinion. It's very interesting. And this stuff happens in real time. I was watching this happen today on Twitter and just all morning, basically. People were getting really, really charged up to call this, the neo-Nazi arm of extremist domestic terrorists, or whatever they're calling everybody now. And when the press conference happened this morning at 8:30, all of those people who were jumping on the bandwagon, this was a MAGA riot again, this was a MAGA maniac, and we're going to try to blame all Trump supporters for it. Soon as the press conference broke and they heard that, hey, this guy doesn't have a white name, this might sound like somebody else's name, somebody from a different country, somebody who immigrated into this country. All of a sudden, everybody got a little bit of their necks were hurting. They got a little whiplash going on because, whoa, they were going on the road one way, and then the narrative shifted, and so they just got jerked the other direction. Now, that whole narrative, you saw a lot of people on BuzzFeed were just like, oh, God, I got to delete my draft. Sorry about that, everybody. And they had to come up with a new narrative. And this was on full display this morning, and I want to show you an example of this. So Caleb Hull brought this up, and he was referring back over to Amy Siskind. These are just Twitter posts that she posted on her page today. Says when she thinks the shooter is white versus when it turns out the shooter is Muslim, right? And I don't know if that's a fair, we don't know this guy's religion, but this is sort of based on his name and his origin. And two very distinctly different tweets. So on Monday night at 6:40 p.m., March 22nd, she says the shooter was taken into custody. In other words, it was almost certainly a white man. If he were black or brown, he would be dead. Okay, so right out of the gates, this whole thing is a racial thing. So because he's taken into custody, he's a racist white guy. And if it was anybody else, they would have been dead already. We're starting to see this narrative bubble up. Okay, there was the other shooting that took place previously where the police officer said something, uttered the words, he had a bad day, something like that. Everybody, oh my gosh, what a racist. This guy's racist. Oh, he's just saying that white murderer just had a bad day. Well, if he was black, then they would say that this was the tragedy of the last millennia, right? Because it's a race thing. Everybody's primed for this. They're just ready. They're like spring loaded. So Amy Siskind, just one example of many. Go look around on Twitter. You'll find them. Initial thought, white guy. Then this morning at 8:32, right after the press conference, says, let's mourn the victims, but not glorify the killer with the intention of having his name widely known. Right? So you want to talk about it if it's a presumed white guy, but as soon as you know the name, it's not a white guy anymore, so maybe we shouldn't talk about that. And it's transparently obvious to me what they're trying to do with this stuff. They're trying to pick the stories. They're trying to pick the tragedies that serve their narrative. It's not appropriate to do this I think, for anybody. But they're making it about race. Now the question is, was this a white guy who loved Donald Trump and who hated other racial minorities? Is there even a conversation about race that's happening here? So why are we talking about white people and brown and black people? All right. So Ian Miles Chung over on Twitter said that these came from the suspect's now removed Facebook page. So we have some new information about this guy, and we'll see a couple posts. Let's go through a couple of them. Here's one. He said he inherited a growing economy and unemployment rate was low. The economy was in an upward spiral. He won because of racism. So this is what the shooter posted on Facebook on September 18, 2018. Obviously not happy about Donald Trump. There's a picture of Trump here. Next up, March 16, 2019, said the Muslims at the Christchurch Mosque were not the victims of a single shooter. They were the victims of the entire Islamophobia industry that vilified them. So he posted that. Right? So he's sort of identifying with the group. Next up, he says, Trump's such a dick. So we post that on September 18th, 2018. Right, so he's not a Trump fan. Somebody who identifies with certain demographics, blames Trump for racism, and the list just goes on and on. So the narrative gets shattered. The whole narrative gets shattered. But that doesn't stop Joe Biden. So here was Joe Biden today reading from a teleprompter, poorly, if I can add that, And he's just reading what somebody else wrote for him. So he's going to tell you about some gun control policies. And he's not wasting any time. I don't even think it's been 24 hours. It's been 24 hours now, but at the time he gave this statement, I'm not sure that it was even 24 hours. 24 hours goes by. He's already got a prepared speech on gun control, ready to rock and roll. And you're going to hear him talk about several bills that are working their way through Congress. Then we're going to talk about Kamala Harris. Then we're going to talk about the Congresswoman who ordinarily would, let's say maybe not bring up a problem with the filibuster, but because of this violence, now she's calling that the filibuster be removed so they can pass all of this legislation through. So the dominoes are in full effect and they're just being knocked down one at a time. Turned out it wasn't a white guy, but that doesn't stop the momentum here. The train's already left the station. They're going for gun control. Here is Joe Biden talking about it. Not even 24 hours later. Here he is.
The one thing I do know enough to say on is in terms of what's happened there. While we're still waiting for more, the one thing I do know enough to say on is in terms of what's happened there. While we're still waiting for more information regarding the shooter, his motive, the weapons he used, the guns, the magazines, the weapons, the modifications that apparently have taken place to those weapons that are involved here, I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again. I got that done when I was a senator. It passed. It was law for the longest time. And it brought down these mass killings. We should do it again. We can close the loopholes in our background check system, including the Charleston loophole. That's one of the best tools we have right now to prevent gun violence. The Senate should immediately pass, let me say it again, the United States Senate, I hope some are listening, should immediately pass the 2 House-passed bills that close loopholes in the background check system. These are bills that receive votes of both Republicans and Democrats in the House. This is not and should not be a partisan issue. This is an American issue. It will save lives, American lives, and we have to act. We should also ban assault weapons in the process. I'll have much more to say as we learn more, but I wanted to be clear. Those poor folks who died left behind families that leaves a big hole in their hearts.
Bad analogy on that.
And we can save lives, increasing the background checks so that they're supposed to occur, and eliminating assault weapons and the size of magazines. We don't know all the detail yet on that. But I'll be talking to you more later today or in the next couple of days about what else we know. May God bless you all. And those families who are mourning today because of gun violence in Colorado and Georgia, all across the country. We have to act so there's not more of you, there's fewer of you as time goes on.
Okay, so that's Joe Biden. Really working hard to get through that, but he got through it, and we got a little bit of stuff that we can glean out of there. Obviously he acknowledges that he doesn't really know, what happened here. We're still waiting on a lot of the details to come out. He doesn't even know really what the details are in his plan. We're going to figure that out. We're going to get back to you, but he does know that they got to act right now. All right. So I don't need to wait a minute. We know you're not waiting a minute. It's not even been 48 hours. It's barely 24 hours. You're already out there talking about all of these different rules that you want to impose. The question would be, Joe, is anything that you're proposing, would that have prevented this shooting? And if so, what does that mean for the Second Amendment? What does that mean for the right to keep and bear arms? Feels like to me that maybe the presumption is changing. Maybe the default here is we start to view this as a situation where people don't get guns, and then the government gives you access if you are approved, if you're licensed, or if you pass this background check that you're talking about, or whatever these new rules look like, rather than the presumption being that the Second Amendment is a fundamental right. It is a constitutional right. You get that by default. Everybody starts there, not the other way around. You don't have to go and beg the government for permission to have a weapon. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the Constitution. Joe Biden is wasting no time. Now we go over to Kamala Harris. This woman is so bad at politics. It's mind-blowing that she's the vice president of this country. I have seen her many times. I have no love for her because of her callousness towards people who have been incarcerated. She put many of them there. She is so bad at this. It's just mind-blowing. So this is a clip from her. And I was watching this. I had to do a double take on this clip. She is asked about this shooting. We get nothing good out of this clip from her. She gives us no insight into anything. Starts asking her questions. They're in this photo shoot. Somebody asks her a question. And here's the photo shoot right here. Here's Kamala Harris over here. So they're all in masks. They're all taking pictures with their masks on because everybody wants pictures in their masks. So apparently, somebody's getting confirmed. We've got the family there, daughters. Somebody's holding a Bible here. So you can excuse Kamala Harris for maybe not being prepared because she's caught off guard a little bit. But she is asked about this Colorado shooting. And just watch what she does. She gives almost non-answer. A non-answer. Goes, oh yeah, it's just tragic. It's very tragic. And let me think about something to say. I'm digging, not coming up with anything. So I'm just going to say it's just tragic. It's just awful. Our hearts go out to everybody. Okay. I think 10 people, 7 children. Okay, so she's up to speed a little bit on the facts. And she says, yep, it's just tragic. And she makes a beeline for the door. She just jumps out of there, just bails. I'm out of here. I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else to say. I'm not happy that you asked me this question. So the family's kind of still standing there. Kamala Harris is just running for the door. Here is the clip.
In response to the shooting in Colorado yesterday.
It's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. It's tragic. 10 people were going about their day, living their lives, not bothering anybody. A police officer who was performing his duties and with great courage and heroism. 7 children, I understand. It's tragic.
Is
tragic.
gun legislation more of a priority now that in the wake of the shootings?
She just bails out of the room. She goes, yeah, it's just tragedy. It's just a tragedy. And I'm out. Right? You got to finish a statement like that. Yeah, that's why the Biden administration is committed to gun reform. That's why we need to pass an assault weapons ban. This is why it's so important that we love our loved ones. Like, what's her conclusion? She just goes, yeah, it's tragic. It's really tragic. And he died heroically. It's just tragic. Makes a beeline, leaves the room. Just terrible at it. It's like this is a political layup. It's not a big deal, right? I mean, it's not a big deal. You'd expect more from her. Like, this would be something you would expect from a low line, like an intern. Somebody goes, I don't know, it's tragic, and trying to come up with some words. But this is the vice president of the country. Has nothing to say. It's like a layup. It's like going up and hitting a ball like a T-ball. Just set that one up. Hey, a lot of people got killed in this country. Do you have anything to say about that? Yeah, I'm just horrified. I'm outraged. We're going to do a bunch to, fix this problem. I'm tired of seeing this happening. Blah, 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 blah. It's tragic. Makes a beeline because there was no teleprompter there. She didn't have a script to refer to. She reads just as much as Joe does. And we have another Democratic congressperson who is also out there talking about eliminating the filibuster in order to pass this gun legislation BS. So let's listen to her. Remember what the filibuster is. It's this rule that exists in the Senate that says that in order to pass some legislation like this, you need to have a certain number of votes in order to stop the debate from happening. Currently, it's 60 votes. The Democrats don't have 60 votes in the Senate. So if they wanted to pass some garbage bill like this through, which we're going to talk about, then they would need some Republicans to join them on that because they can't do that. Well, they're not happy about it. A lot of their stuff that they want to cram down everybody's throats is getting jammed up. So they want to remove the 60-vote rule. They want to eliminate the filibuster, and they're looking for any excuse to do it. Any excuse. We've already seen this with the voting bill. We saw Stacey Abrams recently saying that we need to just create this little exemption, this exception to the filibuster just to pass voting rights legislation through because we know we can't do it on our own. And if we can get this through, then we know that we're going to win elections indefinitely for the indefinite future. So that was one. Now we have another person. This individual is Veronica Escobar. She's a representative Democrat from Texas, now talking about eliminating the filibuster for gun control. So we're just going to see this drum being beaten over and over and over again. Here she is.
What are you calling for today? Well, we need to do away with the filibuster. You know, what we're seeing happening in America is Republicans in the Senate are more interested in eroding voting laws and increasing gun rights, when, you know, it really should be the other way around. We need to look at making sure that we have safe communities and that people aren't afraid and terrified of going to the grocery store or going to a school. And the majority of Americans support common sense gun violence prevention legislation, but we can't get anything done in the Senate because a majority doesn't rule. It's the filibuster that rules.
Oh, you see how that narrative is changing? Very clever. You know, they're saying, oh, it's majority doesn't rule, it's filibuster rules. That's weird, because 60 votes in order to stop a debate seems like the majority would rule on that. But I understand her point. She's trying to say that we want total rule. We want just only majority rule. We want to get rid of the other rules that sort of slow down the grinding mess of government bureaucracy. They want full steam ahead on that. They want no speed bumps on that road. They're going to do what they can to remove them. This is one of the bills that Joe Biden was talking about. This is the HR 127 bill. It's also called the Sabika Sheik Firearm Licensing and Registration Act. It's a process for licensing and registering firearms, prohibits possession of a certain ammunition and large capacity ammunition feeding devices. So this is in front of Congress right now. Not really making its way through anything. The ATF would establish a licensing system for the possession of firearms or ammunition, also a registration system for firearms. We did a deep dive on this bill, I believe, maybe a month ago. In addition, the DOJ must establish and maintain a publicly available database of registered firearms. So everybody in this country would have to register their firearms. The bill also creates licensing requirements for the possession of a firearm and ammunition. So by default, you don't get to go and just possess a firearm, right? That's not the default in this country anymore. Now you have to go get a license. So the government still maintains the power to grant you that. You don't have that right unless the government gives you permission for that. Even though, you know, it's our Second Amendment. It says here, DOJ will issue a license if they're 21 years of age and older. They undergo a criminal background check. They do a psychological evaluation. And we showed you this bill. I remember this bill now. Absolutely a grotesque bill. They want a psychological evaluation. I think they also want to be able to talk to your insurance company, your medical providers. They also, I think, can communicate with ex-lovers, so they can go back and say, hey, you know that woman you dated 5 years ago that you had a bad breakup with? She said she doesn't think you should have a firearm. So we're just going to go ahead and decline that application. It was something along those lines. It also establishes requirements for antiques. It generally penalizes the possession of a firearm or ammunition unless they comply with licensing and registration. So now it would be a crime to possess a firearm without a government license. So you see how this is getting flipped? And they're using 10 dead people to do it. It's like so reprehensible. It'll make you sick, but that's how they do things now. Never let that crisis go to waste, as they say. We have, you can see here, not a lot of activity on this. This was submitted on January 4th, and then it is being transferred over to the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. That happened earlier this month on March 1st. And so kind of dead right now. Hasn't passed the House, certainly hasn't passed the Senate. Definitely a ways off. I think most of that bill is unconstitutional anyways. So, you know, I kind of haven't been hitting the panic button on this one. I think we're much more concerned about, I would say, HR 1 and the For the People Act, and, you know, getting that crammed through. They're really working hard on that. But you can see, if you go over to congress.gov, there is a list of all of the most important bills, or I wouldn't say the most important. It is the bills that most people are looking at. So for the week of this week, March 21st, look at all the gun reform acts. So we've got the American Rescue Plan Act. That's a stimulus bill. For the People, of course, that's voting. But we then have number 3, which is the Firearm Licensing and Registration Act. Then we have equality. We have another one, HR 8, which is the Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2021. We got a Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act. Then we have Enhanced Background Checks of 2021. So we've got, you know, really like three separate bills here that are all related to firearms. They're all being viewed like crazy over at congress.gov. And, you know, I guess the question is, would that do anything? If we knew about this guy, if we knew that there was some problems with our background check, you know, if we had our eyes open. Would we have been able to catch this guy before he did what he did? And probably not, right? That we all know that. It says here over from the Daily Mail again that the gunman was known to the FBI and ranted about Islamophobes hacking his phone before killing 10 people. Police have not yet confirmed the motive. He's been charged with 10 counts of murder. In posts over the last 18 months, he complained about not having a girlfriend, ranted about President Trump, and talked about his Islamic faith. New York Times reported on Tuesday, I tried to find it, but I couldn't find this over from the New York Times, was known to the FBI because he was linked to another person who had been under investigation for something else. No more details there. Brother confirmed he was a shooter, saying he was paranoid, very antisocial, insisted the shooting was not politically motivated. It's not all a political statement. It's mental illness, they say. Guy used to get bullied a lot in high school. He was like an outgoing kid, but after he went to high school, he got bullied a lot. He started becoming antisocial. Right? So maybe that's the bigger problem. Doesn't that sound familiar? It sounds really familiar to me. Oh, we knew about him. Everybody knew, but nobody did anything. In this case, apparently the FBI knew about him. Why didn't they do something about it? Why do they have to pass all these bills and legislations that make it difficult for lawful citizens to go and exercise their Second Amendment right? Why is it now that we got to comply with all of their regulations? Because the FBI apparently knew about this guy. Who knows whether they did anything about it? Who knows if they had enough basis to do anything about it? But anytime that the first call is to just start passing laws and passing legislation that go against one of the fundamental enshrined written rights, drives me bananas. Let's go to the questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Zuck in the house says, what is jury nullification? Does it relate? Says, thanks, Rob. You're the man. You are, Zuck. I appreciate that, though. Jury nullification is a concept that is basically telling the jury or hinting towards the jury, or sometimes the jury can do it on their own, sua sponte, they can sort of bring it out of their own volition. It's the concept that the jury's just not going to follow the law. They're just not going to follow the rules. It's the idea that the example that I've used on this show is, let's say you have a defendant. I'm representing somebody who's been charged with drugs, a drug crime. Arizona has very harsh drug crimes. Often people go to prison for them. With 3 strikes law, we have, any like narcotic drugs, dangerous drugs. They're all class 4 felonies in a special category, so the penalties are very severe. So let's say that this person's on trial for drug charges, and there's somebody on the jury who regularly uses drugs, even illegally. They just haven't gotten caught yet. And maybe they say, I think this whole drug war is stupid. I think the whole thing's stupid. Yeah, technically that guy, that defendant, was charged with a crime and may have actually been in violation of the law. He was caught with some illegal substance on his person. That's not lawful. Might say that's true. It's actually true. The government proved it, and they proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. But because I think the law is so stupid, I'm just going to say, well, it's fine. I'm not going to follow the rules. I know the judge told me that this is what I should do, but I'm not going to do that because I disagree with the laws. The jury is nullifying the law. And so it's a concept. I think it's a valid concept. It's not something that we can talk about in court. You can't, if you were to say that to the jury, you would have a lot of problems for your bar license, a lot of problems with the judge, and you would get in some pretty severe trouble because you have an obligation as an attorney to go into court and follow the law, right? And so a judge would not be happy about it. I think it relates to the Chauvin case, Zuck, but not so much the shooting case, but it's a good question. We have Liberty or Death says the last scary looking gun ban did not work. Leave it to Creepy Joe to use a tragedy to push for gun control. Are you just as surprised that he is pushing for yet another crime bill? Yeah, no, I'm not. It's a good point, Liberty or Death. And it's really, it's really funny. It's like Joe Biden passed 1984, 1986, 1988, 1994 crime bills, loves to just put people in prison and just round them up. And so now he just wants to do that. It's just with it's a new crime. Want to invent a new crime. Possession of guns. Something that used to be a fundamental constitutional right. This new administration is saying, oh no, that's criminal behavior. So unless you, like somebody like me, who's never broken the law before, I got a speeding ticket, a long time ago. And that's it. I mean, should I like overnight with the stroke of a pen be made into a criminal because I happen to possess firearms? They pass this bill. Unless I turn them in or go get a license, I'm a criminal now. I'm in violation of the law. So I don't know, something like 100 million Americans will be criminals overnight. That's Joe Biden for you. That's his criminal justice. Jeremy Matrita says, I believe assault rifle is a made-up term. If the weapon was used for murder, then shouldn't it be called a murder rifle? Yeah. Or not, or a target practice rifle, or a hobby stick, whatever you want to do with it. Social Viking says, Rob, can you do an update on some of the criminal cases being brought up against the Capitol Hill protesters from January 6th? Where do you think the lines will finally be drawn and the witch hunting against law-abiding supporters of a sitting president will stop? Social Viking, I'm not so sure that it is going to stop. I actually don't have any hopes set out for that. I would like to do that. The last thing I was reading about was Jacob Chansley. I was up in arms about the fact that the government will not let him out of custody, and they are now asking for a 60-day continuance because they are so incompetent that they can't bring up they can't prosecute what would be a very simple trespass case timely enough because they're so overwhelmed. Our massive multi-billion-dollar justice bureaucracy can't prosecute, 600 people. It's horrifically embarrassing. But the problem here, and I don't know this defense attorney who's representing Jacob Chansley, but he didn't even throw a fight. Just said, oh, you need 60 days? You need a 60-day continuance? You got it. No problem. Submitted a response, says, yeah, no objection. We agree, whatever. We're just going to let my client sit in there for 60 days. No bail. That's it. Thanks for playing. So that defense attorney gets to go home, but his clients just sit in custody. And maybe he has a reason for it. I don't know. But when I saw that, I was just thinking, oh man, these guys are going to get steamrolled. Not good. And we know that the Justice Department is pulling out all the stops. They are going to slam these people into the ground if they can help it. And it sounds like their defense attorneys are not doing much to alleviate any of that pressure. Woodworking Medic says, I hate to say I agree with Bernie Sanders on his gun views, but gun control isn't a national issue. It's a state issue. Laws that make sense for New York City don't make sense for rural flyover country. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment that says your right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Yeah. Yeah, don't infringe it. It's pretty clear. And the Supreme Court has been pretty clear about that also. See the Veil says, do we have laws in place that prevent these parties from receiving donations for campaigns from outside the USA? Or do they have immunity from these laws because they are private companies? So See the Veil, I'm not sure what companies you're talking about. Did I miss that somewhere? Or do they have immunity from these laws because they are private companies? Yeah, See the Veil, I'm not sure which companies you're talking about. If you're talking about the gun companies, then they're making revenue. I'm not sure that they're collecting donations. I apologize. I'm missing this. I'm not sure what company you're talking about. We have SB says about 12,000 deaths each year from stare accidents versus a few hundred from all rifles. Being a victim himself, Ziden should be promoting common sense stare reform. Yeah, there's a lot of this stuff. Right. And just think about this from handguns perspective. How many people are killed every year from handguns? And how many of these things are taking place in big liberal left-wing cities? How many people are killed in New York City? How many people are killed in Chicago? How many people are killed in Baltimore? How many people are killed in LA? And the list goes on and on. I mean, really, if you calculated the total deaths from handguns and you compared and contrasted that to the total deaths from assault rifles, is it even close? I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I would guess no, it's probably not even remotely close because more deaths ultimately come from handguns. And so why are they talking about assault rifles? Why are they talking about these other things that really on an impactful scale? Yes, it's scary. Yes, there are 10 people that are dead. I'm not trying to say that is not a big deal. That's a huge problem. It's a catastrophic thing. But we also need to talk about how do we have less people killed? Is it the guns or is it the people? Frustrating. All right. We got a couple more questions. This show is running way long, so I'm going to pick it up. News Now Wyoming says Colorado already has a ban on high-capacity magazines. We got a few of their gun manufacturers that came to our state because of their gun rules. Interesting. Jeremy says the gunman was not following the law. What makes politicians believe lawbreakers would follow any future laws, let alone the current ones? Yeah, it's a good point. That comes up often, right? These people are already breaking the law. It's already a crime to go and murder somebody. They do it anyways. Joe Snow says, do you personally think felons ought to be deprived of their Second Amendment after termination of their court-imposed debt to society? No, I do not. I think that once a felon, somebody who's been convicted of a felony, completes their debt, once they complete probation, they pay their fines and restitutions, and society has deemed that to be solid and repaid. No, I don't think that we should have a permanent criminal class in this country. People who are just for the rest of their lives deemed to be criminal and essentially non-citizens. If you're a felon, you lose your right to vote, lose your right to possess a firearm. Hey, if you paid your debt, you get those rights back. I'm all for it. It's Ed says, I find it odd that they don't use gang violence in statistics about mass shooting when the narrative is to show most mass shootings are caused by white men, but they include gang violence when looking at the most mass shootings by country. Yeah, so that you can splice and dice the numbers any which way, I think. You can just do whatever you want with them in order to justify your argument. We got Hack Consulting says, of the immigration that came from the Middle East, mostly Christian Syrians came in the first wave of Arab immigration in the 1900s. Then in the 60s, and recently has been more Muslim from Egypt, Iraq, and the like. So given the guy is Syrian, at least what I heard was found out after they claimed white, he may be closer to the white category that the media likes in their narrative than the Asian, the Middle East Asian. If we would stop infringing the right to bear arms, even if they are felons or insane, the situation would resolve itself quickly. It was interesting when I heard of the guy's name, I was like, yeah, totally white. Well, there was a lot of people just charged up, ready to run with that narrative, but then it did not come to fruition. We've got See the Veil says, do we have laws in place that prevent these parties from receiving donations for a campaign outside the USA? Talking about the Democratic Party and Republican parties are listed as corporate or so-called non-profit. Yeah, so you have some SEC rules or the FEC rules, the Federal Elections Committees, and there's all sorts of rules about reporting and who can send money and all of that. And I think there was a situation where this was a problem for the Obama people. Apparently, they were accepting a lot of money from overseas during one of those campaigns where they weren't vetting where that money came from. And I think they got fined by the FEC a couple $100,000. Of course, it didn't matter. He won. And so what's a couple $100,000 fine? But yeah, there are rules in place. I just am not as familiar with them as other people who live in that world. Feisty Lady says, in Illinois, to even possess a firearm, you have to have a FOID or a concealed carry if applicable. If I understand, if a gun owner also gets approved for medical marijuana, use the FOID is automatically revoked. If there's some other similar states, is there something other in other states? The FOID card applications are supposed to be approved or denied within 30 days after full background checks, currently taking around 200 days or more. Lawsuits have been filed against the Illinois State Police. Interesting. Yeah, so in Arizona, I think it depends on your gun rules. Arizona, we have very, very, very strong gun rights here, sort of embedded into our state constitution that we can't even have registries and things like that here. So I'm not aware of anything like that. It's quite easy to get a firearm in Arizona. You just go through the regular ATF background check process. That's it. All right, walk out with a firearm the same day. So I'm not familiar how every other state works. And I know California has very draconian gun laws. I have my concealed carry license, so I don't have any real familiarity with anything that would preclude that other than being a felon. We have legal marijuana now. I think the only thing as it relates to marijuana that's asked on that form is, do you use illegal drugs? And there's a reminder that says, hey, by the way, marijuana is still illegal federally. So if you're filling that box out, you got to decide what to put in there. We have Ma Fox says, this has been done for a while. Ever since the NZ shooting, they've been trying to suppress covering up mass shooters' names. They believe it gains them infamy, which is what they believe mass shooters are looking for. I think there's some good argument on that, that this stuff gets glorified and really, really amplified even by the media. We saw this, I think it was the Virginia Tech shooting. Remember that? Remember when that guy posted a bunch of videos of him getting really aggressive in the camera, with his guns and all of that stuff. And the media went hog wild with that. I remember that. I was grossed out by that as well. Everybody was doing it. All of the news just all day for 24 hours. And then they just stopped because people were so grossed out by the just never ending cycle of images. It was awful. Here, next up, we've got, they were given the nickname the drive-by media for a reason. That comes from Jeremy Matrita. Yeah, Rush used to say that all the time, the drive-bys. Hack Consulting says, of course, they have a pre-written speech ready for gun control. All they have to do is Mad-lib what they already have. Those of you thinking this was a pre-planned incident, sorry, mate, but these things don't need to be orchestrated. It is reasonable with the current state of society that these things will bubble up. The issue is, quote, if society wouldn't be bettered by a spray of bullets, then bullets wouldn't be sprayed from time to time. Interesting thought there. We have It's Ed says, what stipulates high capacity? Well, it's whatever they want to ban. What stipulates an assault weapon? Yeah, it's whatever they define it to be. They just get to decide these terms, and you just, as a citizen, have to just eat it, apparently. News Now Wyoming says, have you started a poll yet on how long before Biden is removed from office and replaced? Put me down for the process starts 3 weeks before the 2-year anniversary of January 20th. 3 weeks before the 2-year anniversary. So that would mean 21, 22, 23. Yeah, so 2023, about January 2023. I think it'll probably, so the midterms will be what, in 2022, I believe. Yeah, so I think it's right after the midterms. That's when I think it'll happen. Put me down in that. So if you do the squares, if you're doing a little, betting squares, I'm right after the midterms. That's when we start to see the exit strategy, because we got to get Kamala ramped up for the next presidential cycle. Just my thoughts. Woodworking Medic says, what blows my mind is they want to ban the assault rifle that uses .224 and .556, but they are totally fine with 45 Bushmaster, which can be used in either hunting rifles or assault rifles. Well, Woodworker, you can't tell people that. That's a little secret. We also have It's Ed says, didn't McConnell warn if Dems do remove the filibuster, they're going to pay for it later when they're not in power and are crying about putting the filibuster back in place? So he did that originally. He said that when they removed the filibuster rule for, I think it was judicial appointments, Mitch McConnell said, you're going to regret this. Then they did. Now Trump got 3 people seated on the Supreme Court because those idiots did that. And they're going to do it again. And he said, if they do that, that it's going to be scorched earth in the Senate. He's going to go hard against them. And I believe him, because it's Cocaine Mitch. He's back in business. Liberty or Death says the Congresswoman is just mad, but excited because she wants to live in a democracy, but we are a republic. Democracy example, 3 pedophiles and a parent voting on the age of consent. Democracy example, 3 pedophiles and a parent voting on the age of consent. It's called tyranny of the majority. It's a big problem with democracy, which is why our founders didn't make a direct democracy here. It's a good point. We have Jeremy says, when you have a list of gun owners, you also have a list of unarmed citizens. Yeah, you do, right? Because everybody who's not on your list is on the other list. Joe Snow says, what kind of gun do you carry? Well, Joe, that's a little secret, my friend, but there are several different versions, several different sizes, several different brands kind of scattered throughout. So there's a lot on that list. We have Liberty or Death says, yes, Joe Biden made the speech. Yeah, it's exactly right. I have not seen that one before, but I like that. Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, look, I love old people. I think that they should be revered. I think they should be cherished. I think our society is way too disposable with old people. And it's not something to be okay with, right? We just throw them in nursing homes and say, all right, just get the hell out of here. Nobody wants to go see you anymore. Good luck to you. Because they've just become sort of disposable, which is just horrifically sad. And Joe Biden, it kind of makes me sad and it kind of makes me laugh. But did you watch him on that video? I mean, you just get real close to him and you can just see he's reading, and he's not even reading quickly. And you can see when he loses his place a little bit. I mean, it's comical. It's actually pretty funny. I feel terrible for the guy. It's time for him to retire off into the sunset, because I don't think he really truthfully knows where he is. And I know that this is being a little bit cruel, and I know that we have a policy on the show to not be mean to people, but I've been watching him. I watched that whole, it's a 4-minute clip. I only clipped out a little portion here. And you can just watch his eyeballs. And I know politicians read. I know Trump reads, and they all read. But they also talk extemporaneously. They also communicate with the American people off the cuff. Joe Biden just doesn't do that. He just reads on a daily basis, and it's not even good reading. It's very labored, and he looks like, man, he needs a nap after every single time we see him on camera. It's just a bummer. We have another one from Hack Consulting says, I always thought that Joe would have to watch for Kamala when going around stairs. Didn't realize he had to watch Gravity too. Marked safe from stairs and a slight breeze today. Joe Biden. Oh, you guys are killing me. Marked safe from stairs and a slight breeze today. Joe Biden stairs in the brackets. It's March Madness. Is that still happening? Stairs beat Joe Biden. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is not good. I got to get it together. We got one more segment. Whew. All right. Yeah. I mean, look, I don't like to make fun of old people falling downstairs. It's sad. It's sad. But what the problem here is the double standard, right? They're both old, and I'm not really happy that we have as I just got done saying, I'm very happy. I love and cherish old people, but I'm not so sure that they need to be running the entire country at this point in time. Okay. People who can't walk up a flight of stairs or down a flight of stairs, it's time for them to just go retire and ride off into the sunset so that we can get some stuff done in this country. Oh, thank you for that. Oh, good stuff. All right, let's get it together. Let's snap back in the game. We've got one more segment. We're going to be talking about immigration. It's already been, almost 2 hours here, so we're going to fly through this next segment. All right, let me take a sip of this water here. Poor Joe Biden. All right, so now let's get into it. The Biden administration just released new video of the border crisis. We've been talking about the border crisis on this channel. We've been talking about a lot of the different crises around this country, and we're starting to see a different narrative develop around the border. Previously, it wasn't much talk about this being a crisis. It wasn't even a big problem, something that was totally under control, but now the numbers are just not matching the reality. The numbers are becoming a reality that the Biden administration is going to have to deal with. And this new story came out yesterday. We were talking about some of the images that leaked from within the facilities. To frame this out a little bit, if you recall, when Donald Trump was in office, there was a big narrative that Donald Trump was keeping kids in cages because he's a racist monster. And this was the worst thing in the world. I mean, we saw this all day, every day, from AOC, from a lot of people in the media, all just out there hyperventilating about the horrific situation that poor children were in as they were being stripped away from their parents. Well, now that same thing is happening by about a factor of, double or triple what it was under the Trump administration. And we're starting to see now some response. People are very upset about it. People in the media, people even on the left, traditional leftists, are also upset about it, really kind of for different reasons. If you're a conservative, if you're somebody on the right, you're concerned about unbridled immigration coming into this country. If you're on the left, you want that unbridled immigration coming into this country. You're upset that it's not happening fast enough. You're disappointed that the conditions are so bad, and you just kind of want it to just open up, process these people through, let them come in because it's the more humane thing to do, allegedly. And so both sides are now, sort of getting up in arms about this, and the Biden people are going to have to respond to it. And so we're going to go through this. We're going to give you a little bit of background on just how bad the numbers are, because they are very bad. Then we're going to poke around through the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website and see if we can piece together what's going on, because there's a lot of people who are making claims under this concept of asylum. They need to be let into the country where they're afforded some due process, where they get some court interviews, where they have some formal procedures that they go through in order to be allowed to remain in the country. They're going through this process right now. So we've got to flesh out a little bit about what's going on. The first story comes over from ABC News. They were down there at the border. They were actually speaking with a lot of people yesterday. They posted this early this morning, March 23rd, 4 a.m., says here, the videos shot last week and released on Tuesday by Customs and Border Protection show living conditions inside the processing facility in El Paso, Texas, a holding facility in Donna, Texas, where unaccompanied children and other migrants, including families, are being held while they await transfer to other federal agencies better suited to address their needs. So these were shot last week, and then they were released today, Tuesday. So these are, a couple days old, maybe a week old. Internal CPB documents obtained by ABC News shows there are now 3,889 migrants in the Donna facility that is meant to hold just 250,000. That means it is currently at 1,556% capacity. Massive. A record number of 5,000 unaccompanied children are in custody, and an additional 10,000 are in the care of Health and Human Services, according to a document contained by ABC News. And so I want to make special attention, call this out specifically. If one facility, it's meant to hold 250 people, there are now 3,800 people there. That's 1,556% over capacity. So just think about that in terms of the numbers. I mean, just gargantuan numbers. 250 people should be there. There's almost 4,000. Massive, massive problem. So the question is, all right, we just heard that they're being held while they await transfer to other federal agencies better suited to address their needs. We have a major processing problem, regardless on what side you're on, whether you think these people should be afforded the ability to stay, or whether they should be returned home and wait there. There's a lot of issues that you can debate over on that. But the real question is, how do we solve this processing issue? And there's a lot that goes into this. So let's take a look at what asylum even means. What are we talking about? Why are all these people coming here? What do they want? Well, they want obviously to be admitted into the country. One way they can do that is through the asylum mechanism. Now, I am not an immigration attorney. I don't spend any time in this field. So what I did is I just went to the website, to the government's website, poked around. I want to show you how some of this stuff works. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, right? This is all from the government's website. And the reason why I wanted to start here and show you how some of this stuff works is because this is what we were talking about yesterday. When it comes to incentives, a big question that's been on my mind about this whole immigration problem is why now? Why are all these people suddenly, why are there, theoretically, we talked about numbers like 2 million people expected to come across up from the south into the southern border of the United States. What caused that? What triggered that? What prompted those people to do that? And I've been in clubhouse rooms. I've been in conversations with other people, including other immigration attorneys, who tell me that this isn't Biden's fault. This is nothing to do with him. This had specifically to do with, apparently people just got a memo that America's open for immigration, and they're really not. So you can't blame Biden for that. I have not been satisfied with any of any responses to my question about, well, what about the incentives that have been created by saying that you can wait in the United States now? Donald Trump, if you recall, when people were immigrating in or they were applying for asylum, he said, that's fine, you can do that, but you got to wait in Mexico while we process your case. Biden came in, rolled that back, says you can wait in the United States while we process your case. And so in my mind, that created a massive incentive to cause people to immigrate up from the southern border into the U.S. because they know they can hang out here. They can sit here. The government's going to take care of them while this is processing. And if the government is going to stem the tide, if they're going to stop the flow of people across the border, well, then maybe that's going to require some more enforcement. And so people, rightfully so, have the incentive. They have the understanding that if they can get in before the door closes, maybe they can be processed and stay in the country. So it's causing, via the incentives that emanate from the policy changes directly from the Biden administration. They have made these decisions. And so the question becomes, well, what are they telling other people? If you are an immigrant, if you are somebody who wants to be in this country, and you're down on the internet, down south of the border, down in Guatemala, we heard from an individual who's coming up from Brazil yesterday. You can go onto this website and take a look. Let's do that. It says here, every year, people come to the United States seeking protection because they have suffered persecution or fear that they will suffer persecution due to a lot of options here: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. If you are eligible for asylum, you may be permitted to remain in the U.S. To apply, all you need to do, file this form, I-589 asylum. You have to do it within 1 year of your arrival to the U.S. You got to apply for it within 1 year. So you can come into the country. There is no fee to apply for asylum. You may include your spouse, your children, who are also in the United States on your application with you at the time you file, at any time until a final decision is made on your case. All you got to do is fill out this other form, I-589 application and hold. So it's the same form up here. If you have an application pending with us, check your status over here. Who is eligible to it? So this is what it is. You can come to the United States. You can seek protection because you've suffered persecution or you fear that you will suffer persecution. So it doesn't have to be actual persecution. Right? If you fear that you're going to suffer persecution, and you can put it into one of those buckets: race, religion, nationality, being a part of a particular social group, or having a political opinion. If you can articulate fear of persecution for that, you're eligible for asylum according to this. Now, this is different from the refugee program, where the country sort of identifies a key, very interested, protected class in a different country. Somebody's, being politically prosecuted in a civil war or something like that. Then we'll say, well, those people are refugees, and that's a different category. This is asylum. This isn't anything that is focused or hyper-specific. It's just, hey, come on in. If you think that you are suffered or potentially facing persecution, that's enough. As long as you fall in one of those categories. Who is eligible to apply? You can do it. You can apply if you are at a port of entry or in the United States. So if you're coming up across the border, if you're down there on the border right now, if you're at a port of entry, you can apply. You're eligible to apply for asylum. Again, you can do it regardless of your immigration status, and you got to do it within 1 year of your arrival. You're not eligible if you filed your applications with the U.S. after being in the country for more than 1 year. Okay, now you're going to see here, the general rule is if you came to the country and you're hanging out here for over a year, well, now you just sort of overstayed your welcome. We're going to give you 1 year to go and file a request for asylum. If you don't do it within the 1 year, then you lose your right to do so. And it's a good incentive to cause people to communicate with the courts. You want to give people incentives to resolve this undocumented status. So they do that. They have a pretty big stick in this law. If you don't do it within 1 year, you lose the right to do that generally. But then if you read it further, you're going to see there are just a ton of exceptions. So you can have an exception if you have a changed circumstance that materially affects your asylum eligibility. So whatever that changed circumstance is, or you have extraordinary circumstances relating to your delay in filing. So if there's something that prevented you from filing, you must still file your application within a reasonable time under the circumstances to be eligible for an exception. And if you go down and read the rest of this webpage, you're going to see that all of these exceptions, they explain what this is down here. They explain what changed circumstances are over here. They go down here and, all these things. So this is where the lawyers make their money. It gets very messy. The immigration lawyers, okay, well, technically the rule says 1 year. You're outside of it. That's okay. Let me look in my statutes, and you're going to see all of these other exceptions that will still get you into the country, or at least applying for asylum, even though you were technically outside of the rule. All right, there's two types of asylum. I want to just give you a crash course on this. So you've got one is affirmative asylum, and you have one that is defensive asylum. And I think we're talking today about affirmative asylum. So affirmative asylum is the concept that you're sort of coming to the country and you're proactively asking for asylum. Defensive asylum is that you're already in the country and you kind of got in trouble for not being here, and now you're acting defensively. You're saying, no, don't kick me out because I am going to be claiming asylum. You're using that as a defense. The affirmative asylum is more that, an individual has not been placed in removal proceedings before a judge. They've affirmatively submitted their form. They appear before an asylum officer. They provide a qualified interpreter for their interview. So it's sort of people who are coming to the border. They're going to be in this camp. Whereas defensive is an individual has already been placed in removal proceedings before a judge. So they're already in removal proceedings. They already have immigration violations and so on. And so I don't think that applies right now. This is for people who really don't have any history in this country. They're coming here. They're making an affirmative claim for asylum as soon as they get to the border, that port of entry, and they're going to go through the following process. And it looks like this. And you can see here, it says, number one, to apply for asylum in the U.S., you must be physically present in the United States. Okay. And I don't know if this changed recently. This is under the new administration. I'd be very curious to know what this said 6 months ago. Is it, and we got to ask ourselves, what incentive is this creating? If you go on the website, you can just look this up. Okay. Hey, I want asylum in the United States. What do I have to do? Step one. Well, it's pretty easy. It says, to apply for asylum in the U.S., you got to be physically present in the U.S. Oh, that's step one. So I guess I got to arrive in the U.S. Seems like that might be a pretty big incentive to cause people to come to this country. It's the first step before you even apply. Step two is apply. Then step three is fingerprinting, background, security checks. Then you you receive an interview notice in step four. Step five, you get the interview. Step six, you have an asylum officer that makes the determination on eligibility, and supervisory asylum officer reviews the decision. Step seven, you get the decision. But the first thing you got to do before any of this stuff can even start to apply for asylum in the U.S., you must be physically present in the U.S. Okay, so sounds to me like that might cause people to say, well, I better get my butt in the U.S. physically. So we're talking about incentives. What is causing these people to cross the border? The government policy right there tells you on their own website. Got to get in the country. Now, what happens if you are a minor or unaccompanied minor asylum child? You can also apply. If you're under 18, you can apply. If you want to have your own case separate from your parents or spouse, you can apply. If you're unaccompanied, though, and the question is, if you are under 18, you can also apply. Have no parent or legal guardian who can provide care or custody, so that they're not in the U.S. So you're under 18, you get to apply. If you were separated from your parents or your legal guardians, entered the U.S. without a parent or an adult guardian, but left the parent's care, have a parent that is deceased, and there is no legal guardian arrangement. So that's basically what we get there. So kids, send your kids, send your 16-year-old, send your 14-year-old. Not a big deal. You can also bring your spouse and bring your children, in fact. So you can just bring the whole family. Because if you go over here on this part of the website, how can I obtain asylum benefits for my spouse and children? Very simple. You must list your spouse and children on your Form I-589, the application for asylum, regardless of whether they're alive or dead, missing, born in other countries, under 21, married, unmarried, living with you, born when you were not married, any of those things. You may include your spouse as a dependent on your application. You may also include your children if they're under age 21, unmarried, also in the United States. Bring your family members to the asylum interview. If you're granted status, family members included on your application will also be granted asylum status. Unless they are barred from asylum, they're going to be allowed to remain in the U.S. as well. If you're referred to the immigration court, your family members will also be referred to the court for removal proceedings if they are not in legal status. It tells you what different forms to file. Okay, we've got a Form I-730. We've got a number of different forms. The question was, how long does this stuff take? And you can't get a real clear answer on all of the forms individually. I'm not sure let me show you this. So there's a website or a page on their website talking about case processing times. We are testing a new method to calculate processing times for these different forms. And you'll notice that the main forms that we're curious in here are not on this list. What do the processing time mean? What do they mean? Estimated time range. We can now show case processing time as a range. The first number is the time it takes to complete 50% of the cases. The second number is the time that it takes to complete 93% of the cases. They're updated on a monthly basis. So you can go in there and you can see specifically what it's looking like. And if this is indicative of any of the other reports, 5.5 to 8 months. Right? It's a long time to process cases through the immigration system. And we're at 1,500+% capacity. So what are we going to do about that? All right. So here are some of the video footage, I think, from
at the border.
The border.
First look at video
Here's
inside
the video.
one of the facilities that has been overwhelmed by the surge in migrants. Our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, is outside that facility. It's in Donna, Texas. Good morning, Cecilia.
Hi, Robin. Good morning to you. Yeah, we were out late last night talking to migrants who just crossed. We talked to young children, 2 boys, 7 and 9 years old. They are traveling by themselves, and there are so many children just like them who will likely end up in facilities just like this one behind me, severely overcrowded, no place for a child. Inside this tent facility on the southern border, so many children, they are sleeping on floors, side by side, huddled under foil blankets. The Biden administration refusing to allow journalists in to see for themselves, sources providing this first look. This video shot by Customs and Border Protection last week, obtained exclusively by ABC News. Only 250 people are supposed to be held here. Instead, there are close to 4,000. Some families, mostly unaccompanied minors, traveling alone, from teenage boys to infants. Here, toddlers in a playpen being watched by a caretaker. The kids made the treacherous journey all the way from Central America, hoping to claim asylum. Inside, they get medical checks. They line up one by one for food. This video showing girls at a center in El Paso exercising outside. But this is no place for children, crammed into pods, one pod housing more than 400 boys. The White House says they're working as quickly as possible to move these kids into shelters and homes, calling in FEMA for help. But under fire from critics who say they didn't do enough to plan for the surge after overturning many of Trump's hardline immigration policies, the administration still refuses to call the situation a crisis.
Well, children presenting at our border who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing prosecution, who are fleeing terrible situations is not a crisis.
At the border, we're with authorities on patrol, and the children just keep coming.
¿De dónde vienes? Honduras.
This family telling me they've been traveling for more than a month, walking most of the way.
Cansado, ¿verdad? No.
He tells me he's not tired. He says he's ready to keep walking.
¿Listo para caminar más? Sí.
And just up the road, an even larger group. In it, these 2 boys, 9 and 10 years old, both traveling alone, walking for more than a month. The group has taken them in, promising to keep them safe. The boys show me phone numbers of family members in the U.S. they soon hope to find. One written on a hat.
This is his grandfather's phone number.
The other written inside his pocket.
It's right here in his pants. ¿Tienen miedo?
I ask, are you scared? Yes, they tell me, very.
They are scared and they are hungry. The Border Patrol takes them into custody after we met them. They got brought to a place like this facility here behind me. We are seeing so many kids being housed in these facilities way past the 3 days that they are legally allowed to be here. After a place like this, they get put into a more child-friendly location, like a shelter or a foster care system where the government tries to reunite them with their family. That can take up to a month, sometimes over a month. This is a really complicated process. Robin, I will never forget, I can tell you, I will never forget the faces of those little boys.
I know that you won't. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's just awful. I mean, the whole thing's awful. And it really doesn't matter, I think, what side of the debate you're on. You can be somebody who says, well, look, we need to have very strict immigration rules. We cannot allow people coming into this country unbridled. And you can say, no, they all got to be turned back. And that can be your policy position. I think you can make some arguments to defend that, whatever. You can pick that side. You can also pick the other side that says, hey, these are people. The country obviously needs more individuals coming to this country. You can make an economic argument. You can make a humanitarian argument. You can make whatever argument you want. It doesn't even matter. That's kind of beside the point. The point here, Joe Biden and this administration caused this problem. I think that is the takeaway on this, truthfully. And they are trying to escape responsibility for it. They're sort of, we just heard Jen Psaki there saying, well, it's not a crisis because they didn't want to define it as a crisis. Well, it sort of feels like a crisis when you've got 4,000 people in a facility that's built for 250. That's a pretty big problem. You've got COVID issues. You've got kids without parents. You've got a whole, this is a pressure cooker just waiting to explode. And I think part of the disconnect here is that the people who caused the problem are not willing to own it. They rolled back a lot of these, whatever they want to call draconian Trump policies, hardline immigration policies as they label it, but now they don't want to fix the problem. They just want to sort of let this thing fester, even to the point where videos of the true conditions are having to be leaked out to news reporters because the Biden people are not letting people into the office or into these facilities, as we just heard from that woman who was doing the narration on that ABC 15 clip. So just the whole thing is sad. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that was caused directly by bad policy, directly by the government. Now they're trying to say that well, we're going to get to that here in a minute. Let's take a quick question. This one popped up sort of in the middle. It says, Chairman of the board says, saying the border crisis has nothing to do with Biden and it is a coincidence that he just took over is complete willful ignorance. I'm sure Kamala is having a good laugh about it somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. It's like somebody goes in, they change something. There's a whole catastrophe that just follows immediately. And then you turn around and you say, well, it's not my fault. I didn't change anything. This happened on its own. That was going to happen anyways. These people were going to come to the border anyways. It had nothing to do with your policy. You've been in office for like 3 months. Did your policy do anything to cause, to change the incentives that caused this to come here? We got another clip from Kamala, who thinks this one's pretty hilarious.
At the border? Not today. But I have before, and I'm sure I will again. Yeah.
So another non-answer. Hey, are you going to the border? Not today. But I have been before, and I probably will go again. All right, well, there's a crisis right now that your administration caused. Are you going to go down there and take a look at that? You just going to laugh to yourself hysterically? Poor woman. All right, here are some more photos of the inside. So, kids in cages. We were getting just beaten over the head with that for years. This was the part of the backbone of the whole Trump is a racist thing. Remember this? Well, why is he a racist? Well, he puts kids in cages. He's stripping children away from their parents. Can you believe that? You support that? And now it's like 10 times worse. So it's just, I laugh at it because it's such a double standard. It makes me sick to see what's happening to these kids. These kids are being incentivized by their parents, by our government, to send them across the border with the hopes that they're going to have a better life. I don't hold that against them, right? If you're a parent, you want the best life for your kids. Who doesn't want to come and be a part of this country for a whole slew of reasons? Not even upset about that. I'm upset that the government created this problem through their own incompetence. And guess who's suffering? These kids are. These kids, their families are suffering. Ridiculous. Here's another image. All sort of just sitting around with their space blankets on. Curtis Hook says, don't worry, guys. Jen Psaki says that the State Department is publishing ads on Facebook and Instagram telling people in Central America to not come to the United States. Oh, and there are radio ads and even a comic book and animated show that will show them. So here is Jen Psaki today, or maybe this was yesterday, talking about running some ads.
If I may, I wanted to, I actually had a little bit of an update or just something I thought would be of interest to many of you, which is what some of the steps are we're taking in these countries to communicate. And a lot of this is through, of course, the State Department and embassies. And so here's a few things we're doing, and this will obviously increase over time, but just to give you a sense of our investment. The State Department continues to, we have placed an estimated 17,118 radio ads in Brazil, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras since January 21st in Spanish, Portuguese, and 6 indigenous languages. These ads played on 33 radio stations, reaching an estimated 15 million individuals. The department has also worked with Facebook and Instagram on an advertising campaign that put our migration messages in the social media streams of millions of individuals who fit the profile of intending migrants. These are very targeted, of course. A total of 589 digital ads in paid search, display, and social media supporting the ongoing migration campaign in the Northern Triangle countries have reached more than 26 million people since Inauguration Day. These ads created over 73 million impressions in the targeted countries, and we're also taking creative approaches in different countries to make sure we're reaching people, meeting people where they are. In some ways, how we try to do things in the United States. So, as an example, NBC San Salvador, a Scuro comic book and animated show seeks to deter irregular migration by addressing violence as a driver. Content focused on violent reduction reached 240,000 young Salvadorans in the targeted audience. The 2 animated episodes in this past year have been viewed by 3.6 million individuals. So each country is taking different approaches. Our embassies on the ground are obviously the experts working with countries, to your point, Steve, to figure out how to communicate clearly in languages that will be received by the people in these countries and communicate clearly this is not the time to come, our borders are not open, and we will continue to pick this up in the weeks and months ahead.
All right. So did they maybe want to change some of the policies, or do they just want to keep advertising that the policies exist, but you shouldn't follow them? I mean, in other words, why didn't they go on their website and just say, hey, we're not open, right? Instead of saying, if you want to apply for asylum, first thing you got to do is come to the United States. Maybe they should change that to something like, if you want to apply for asylum, you can do that, but you have to wait across the border in Mexico, like Donald Trump's policy was. Maybe that would be a bigger disincentive. They're running ads on Instagram. Do you think that somebody's sitting down there going, you know what, my life's miserable, and my only escape from this wretched life is to go immigrate to the United States, but because I saw Jen Psaki on my Instagram feed, suddenly I'm just going to change my mind on that? It's so asinine. It's just so embarrassing. I mean, it really just, I don't even know what to say about this. You've got 2 million people suspected to be coming up into the border by their own numbers, by their own metrics, and they're running some radio ads. That's our government at work. I do digital marketing. I know a little bit about this space. I know impressions, and I know how some of this stuff works. The numbers that she just put out there are like laughable for anybody in that space. Talking about, how many 70 million impressions that she got? Impressions. Okay, great. You know how hard it is to convert somebody? You know how hard it is to get somebody to buy an online product or an online book? It's a lot. And you sort of wrap that all into your cost of acquisition. It's an expensive thing to do. And that's for something very minor, very minimal, with people who are pretty highly technically sophisticated. They're trying to dissuade people who are willing to pack their entire families up. You saw that. 8, 9-year-old kids. Haul them across the desert. They're going to be dissuaded from a radio ad? Maybe some of them will. It's just mind-boggling incompetence. It's just so out of touch with reality, but we'll see where it goes. We'll see if that helps. Yeah, maybe 2 million people, they get a Facebook ad and they just say, you know what, you're right. This country's pretty great. We're just going to stay here. Well, what are they going to do? They're just going to build more facilities, apparently. According to the New York Post, new cage facility for migrant children already underway in Rio Grande Valley. New holding center is being built for unaccompanied kids and migrants. It's being built as fast as they can in Rio Grande Valley as U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials struggle to manage a flood of immigrants that's left existing facilities well beyond capacity. Temporary center is under construction in Donna on a 40-acre plot of land adjacent to Tent City that CPB opened up in February for migrant children that's been criticized as the same sort of, quote, cages that Biden vowed never to allow under his watch. They're building another one as fast as they can, said somebody on Monday. They clearly intend to do 24/7 construction, the source went on, noting a series of light towers that have been set up on the land, which allows for nighttime construction. Usually construction workers work during the day, so that tells you the speed of which they're trying to get this thing up. Facility is expected to be, quote, huge. The plot of land is large enough for more than 35 football fields. The Post visited the site Saturday afternoon, saw large construction vehicles plowing through the land, moving lighting equipment, digging earth before the security guard told the reporter they needed to leave. Guard said the grounds were federal property and law enforcement would be called if they didn't leave immediately. Early on Monday, photos from inside the current facility were leaked by a representative. So you have to have your own, you have to have a congressperson leak these photos because the whole thing is so locked down. Can you wrap your head around that? If you have some inquiry about what your government is doing, no transparency at all. Got to have a congressperson leak photos. Shows devastating, crowded conditions with hordes of young migrants sleeping on mats huddled together in silver space blankets. The elected official who didn't take the photos said the facility had, quote, terrible conditions for children. One pod with tents designed to hold 260 people had 400 unaccompanied male kids. Those numbers that's pretty reasonable relative to some of the other ones. 185,000 square foot facility surrounded by black fence that makes it difficult to see what's going on beyond the perimeter, but at least a dozen tour buses and multiple blue HVAC vehicles were visible during the Post's Saturday visit. Steady stream of people were seen driving in and out of the facility. And here are some images that came over from this reporting. So a lot of construction. They're just bulldozing, moving through this thing. Got to get it up quickly. See these tents in the background. A lot of vehicles over there, doing some digging there. So just going to build more facilities, I guess, because their stupid policies created really perverse incentives for people that's causing people to drag their kids, drag their families across the desert because they didn't like some Trump policies. All right, let's go to the questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. If you want to ask a question, if you want to support the show, that's the best place to do it. All right. So first question comes over from Hack Consulting. Says, who stopped filling the cages, Joe? Who stopped filling the cages, Joe? Well, if you don't have people coming into the country because you create disincentives for them to stop them from coming into the country, then you don't have to build new facilities to put the kids in cages. But if you create incentives that cause people to come across the border, you got nowhere to put them unless you process them much more quickly. So what do you do with them? You got nowhere to put them. They got to go in cages. So who's responsible for filling the cages, Joe? Who's responsible for filling those cages? Good question, Hack Consulting. Remark number 2 says, do you think Joe is trying to recruit new Democrats? Rob, this is as big of a joke as H.R. 1. Wait a second. I suffer persecution for my political beliefs. What country should I go to? Yeah, it is. The whole thing's a joke. The whole thing's embarrassing. It's just, it's woke policy. It's this concept that, we have to act in a humanitarian way, and we have to do everything possible to meet the humanitarian goals, even if the results of our policy changes result in inhumane conditions. Can you believe that? How circular and ridiculous this is? They say we got to do all of this good stuff because we care about people. While your policies are causing thousands of people to drag their families across the desert and throw them in these facilities where they're getting subpar treatment, horrendous treatment. So your humanitarian, your good heart, your wonderful spirit that you have in thinking about the children is causing a disproportionate amount of suffering for children who otherwise probably would have been home with their families. So you're responsible for it. Will they ever recognize that? Probably not. News Now Wyoming says, aren't businesses being punished with huge fines for being at 55% capacity instead of 50%? Yet our government can safely be at over 1,000%. It's a great point. Yeah, it's a great point. They're not following their own standards. 6 feet, now 3 feet. Are they wearing their 2 masks? Are they following Dr. Fauci? News Now Wyoming says the argument about it's not Biden's fault is nonsense. If my daughter does something against the rules and the only punishment she has is I give her chocolate cookies, why would she follow the rules? Yeah. Yeah, she wouldn't. Because there's no disincentive to do that. In fact, she's very highly incentivized to do that. Bumma Lickett says, what happened to the unaccompanied minors that came to America during Obama and the Trump administration? Well, I think largely it's been the same thing, right? You separate them, they apply for asylum. But I think the difference here, the distinction was with Trump, this whole process didn't start in the United States. It started overseas, or it's over the border. There's no sea in between us and Mexico. Really. I don't want to argue that. But, you know, most of the border is just a physical border. So what they were doing is saying you can't start this process in the United States. You can start it from across the border, but you got to wait there while this whole thing is pending. And nobody wants to travel from Brazil to hang out on the Mexican side of the border until their asylum case is processed months later. So they just don't come. That's the disincentive. Now that you're saying you can come in, we'll just release you, we'll place you before we even consider your asylum case. You have a huge swarm of people who are coming. Obviously. This isn't rocket science. Shade says, plan. Number 1, border invasion. 2, take guns away. 3, more vaccines. Number 4, elites, criminals, politicians, and criminals rule the world. Politicians, in parentheticals, criminals rule the world. Yeah, I mean, you know, more chaos gives them a lot of incentives to do other things. Here's Sharon Quidney says, this is a horrible humanitarian crisis. There have been assaults, including sexual assaults. They're playing politics with people's lives, not just people. It's the lives of children. And then there's COVID problem. It's unbelievable and reprehensible. I agree. I think it's a humanitarian crisis of our own making. And I feel bad for the kids. I feel bad for the families. And this was caused by Joe Biden. Now, maybe they'd say, well, it's worth it if they're going to be admitted into the country. Maybe it is. I don't know. That's obviously a decision that they have to make. But what we see there is not okay. And they caused it. Liberty or Death says, if you look closely, one of the TVs in the plastic bubble is playing Dora the Explorer. Well, at least they're getting some TV in there. Chairman of the board says, wondering who bought the t-shirts. Biden, please let us in. Yeah, those look like nice new shirts, like somebody just handed out. So, you know, it's just sad when people are used as a political prop. Throw them in cages. You know, when the Democrats were saying that these were kids in cages, it was, you know, you could criticize that. You can criticize it now. I think that the thing that I'm most upset about this is I think the government is causing this, which doesn't feel right. E. Dantes says, didn't all these families hear how awful and racist this country is? Why would they separate and send their children to be yanked out of their homes by racist police? Maybe because it's not so bad here, right? Maybe we have a lot of people who make it a business to rip on this country and try to tear it down to shreds at every single turn. And they like to say those things. But people who live elsewhere know that it's pretty damn good here. And we've talked about that a lot on this channel. Nadar Blasier says, my favorite political saying, quote, if it wasn't for double standards, Democrats would have no standards at all. I don't like to only hate on one party, but man, they just make it too easy. I know. It's like, you know, well, first of all, the Republicans are just gone with the wind. They're just asleep at the wheel. I don't even know what they're doing. Do they even have a platform? Have they even addressed immigration? What's their solution for this? I don't know. I stay pretty plugged into the news, but they are just totally silent. I would love to rip on the Republicans too, because they're just as bad, really, but they're not even doing anything. At least the Democrats are trying to do something. It's completely boneheaded and it's bad policy as we're seeing, but at least they're doing something. We have Ma Fox says, I hate to be that guy, but changing the immigration asylum policy back to what it was prior to Trump taking office isn't exactly proving to me this is Biden's fault. changing the policy back to what it was prior to Trump taking office isn't exactly proving to me this is Biden's fault. Okay, well, I guess my response to that. So I'm not sure what type of proof you're looking for, but the thing that I'm talking about is about incentives. So if we rolled back Biden's change and we said, you do not get access to this country, you have to wait in Mexico until the asylum process is completed. In my opinion, I mean, I'm speculating here, I don't know, but I would guess that would cause less people to try to come into the country. If they knew they had to wait on the other side of the border, if they knew that our government was erecting these facilities to try to process people, and they had to figure it out on their own on the other side of the border, are you saying that would not create a disincentive to people? Because I think that it would. Now, you may ultimately still have to process people. You may still have to process them through asylum and go through the same formalities. But the question is, are you limiting the funnel? Right? You got a ton of people pouring in at the top. So how do you close that gate? And I think one of the ways you do that is with changing policy that adjusts the incentives that then trickle down to the people and dissuade them from coming across the border. You know what else may have helped? A wall. You know what else may have helped? All of Trump's policies on securing the border. So you can be that guy, Ma Fox, but I'm not sure specifically what you're talking about. I mean, this is a new problem. Trump was already trying to sort of rectify the immigration problem, and you can have a lot of disagreements about his methodology. But this is a new thing that happened. And the only thing that I can identify, and I've heard the arguments that this is about the weather. This is about, this is a nice change. People are just this is happening spontaneously. I get that. But how do we respond to the guy yesterday who was saying that basically when Trump was in office, nobody would even think about coming here. Now that Biden is in office, everybody said basically, yeah, we're all coming to make a run for it. Good question, though, Ma. We got Farmer's Daughter says, how many of those women and kids are actually going to be relatives and not drug cartels and sex traffickers? It's only 14 million a day enterprise. Not only that, we have millions of homeless on the streets, and the government is paying nearly 90 million to put illegals up in hotels. Shame on them. Yeah, so you got a lot of money going into this. You've got a lot of people suffering as a result of this, and it's just government orchestrated incompetence. Nadarb says, am I getting this process right? Or so kids come to the border without parents, then they are moved to other facilities around the country to be adopted out to whoever instead of finding their parents or grandparents. Sounds like government child trafficking to me. Yeah, well, I mean, they got to figure out what to do with these kids. What if they don't have somebody here? Do they go up for adoption? Do they get released? I mean, this is a huge problem. Like, this is not going to get solved overnight. We're not going to have, 50,000 people here, 5,000 a day in some places, 6,000 a day in some places. What's going to happen to those people? It's not good for them. It's not good for those people, right? If the government is going to say that we're going to take responsibility for this stuff, they better take responsibility for it. Because these kids and families are sitting in squalor, and it's not okay. It is inhumane. But they told them to come, essentially. They didn't say that verbatim, but by changing the policies, they created the incentives that resulted in this mass migration. So they got to own it. Now, the difference there between Trump is Trump told them not to come, said that very clearly, right? So there's a big difference there. He intended to create disincentives. They're creating incentives. They broke the China shop, so they got to fix it. And they're responsible for the damage that they caused. Onion says, hey, Robert, the Dems want to have more voters. A migrant said he would not have come. What do you think about the audit in your state? What would happen if there were issues? What do you think? So I think Maricopa County is doing a full audit on 2.1 million ballots. I haven't really been following it because I don't think it changes anything. It doesn't change the outcome of the election, certainly. That's done and over. The only thing that it might do is, cause people to reevaluate what we're doing here as it relates to the election and maybe change some of our election rules. We're already seeing that across the country, which is why the Democrats are very upset about it. And they want to pass H.R. 1 at all costs, even if it means eliminating the filibuster. Ma Fox says, yes, Trump made a disincentive for asylum seekers. For years, we didn't get many. So how do you think this is going to work when the disincentive is removed? So we're seeing how it's working. I must not be understanding you, Ma. Trump made a disincentive for asylum seekers. Yes, it was wait in Mexico. Okay, so we're going to say wait in Mexico. For years, we didn't get many. So how do you think this is going to work when the disincentive is removed? So the disincentive, wait in Mexico, has been removed. And now we have 2 million people apparently suspected to be coming across the border. So I think the disincentive has been removed. I think we're not communicating well. But we've got Hack Consulting says Trump's policy was more of, quote, try to solve your home's issue first before coming here, I think. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good policy. Tremendous says, for a long time, I was against remain in Mexico. The conditions in Mexico were terrible, possibly worse than cages. But to incentivize the trip through Mexico is crazy. I'm part of a group that is sponsoring a woman who made the journey. She was kidnapped, witnessed a murder before escaping. She's an adult currently suffering from PTSD. Imagine being a child living through that journey. Now I see the wisdom in the remain in Mexico policy as a disincentive. Yeah. It's a good way to end it, right? And I think that is our last question, and it is. So I think it's a good point, right? I try to be a humanitarian person. I love to help people. I have a whole business that does that. We love to help good people in difficult situations. I don't want to see people suffering. I don't want to see them, witnessing what this person witnessed, witnessing a murder, witnessing a kidnap, talking about the sexual assaults. It is horrendous behavior. It's awful conditions, and I don't want anybody to be in it. But the government is causing that. Like, I don't know if I'm being inartful here. It sounds like tremendous. You sort of get the gist of this, but there was a policy that encouraged people to not come to the country because they physically could not get in. They had to wait in Mexico. That was Trump's policy. Wait in Mexico, remain in Mexico. Joe Biden comes in, removes that. Everybody can flood across the border. There is no more disincentive there. So now we have an actual incentive to come to the border. And that is causing this. Now they're talking about running ads and stuff on Instagram and Facebook, like that's going to solve the problem. It's so out of touch. There's nobody who gives a rip about any one of those advertisements because they know that the policy is come across, and we'll figure it out when you're here. So if they want to change that policy, that might be effective, but they won't because they are too far invested in this new narrative. If they went back to anything that Trump was doing, which might ultimately reinstall the disincentives and stop this surge of people coming, well, then they would be betraying the far left that really wants unbridled immigration across the border. It's frustrating stuff. Anyways, great questions as always. I want to thank everybody for those questions coming in today. Big thanks to Faith Joy. Big thanks to Ma Fox helping us mod today. A couple other people chimed in. What's up, Chairman of the Board? We've got Jen McClellan, Dr. EMB. Haven't seen her around in a while. Osak was in the house today. Good to see you. We've got some others. We've got XN Drew _Shades. I think I saw today. Brother Dave. We have the Mariner, Paula MK in the house. Who else was here? Want to know. We've got Echo House. We've got SF Bob. No doubt. We have the Woodworking Medic, who I'm covering up right there. Let's give him some love. Saw him today. We got Woodworking Medic in the house. We have Gust Click. Bumma Lickit. Saw them as well. Who else? We've got a couple people signed up very recently. Let's say hello and welcome to Bianca Realty. There we go. I was going to say Beyond Care Ilty, but it's Bianca Realty. Welcome, Bianca. We've got Boom Boom for Love. Oh yeah, that sounds good. We got Sandy Paz in the house. We have Time to Shine. We've got Lim Smith, and then we have Grandpa Gene in the program. What's up, Grandpa? Welcome to the show. I want to thank everybody for supporting us over at locals.com. The address there is watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Support the show. Ask questions as we're going throughout the conversation of the day, and you can also get some pretty cool stuff over there. Get a copy of my book, free and available to download as a PDF. Also grab a copy of the slides. Take a look at the impeachment party documents. If you want to impeach any of your elected officials, very easy to impeach them. Basically, you can draft up an impeachment document in like 10 minutes if you want. Get a copy of my Existence Systems. I'm working on a little program for this. Very excited about it. I'm going to be sinking some time into that over this weekend, but there are links there. Great people who you can communicate with, and it's just a cool place to be. So go on over to locals.com, support the show, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We'd very much appreciate it. Thank you for all your love and all of your support. And lastly, but not leastly, before we wrap up for the day, I am a criminal defense attorney. I here at the R&R Law Group, we love to help good people charged with crimes find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases and in their futures. We can help anything or anybody with anything that involves the police, really. If it's a minor misdemeanor offense, if it's a traffic offense, we help with those. If it's a major misdemeanor, if it's a DUI, drugs, domestic violence, minor felonies, major felonies, some of the more gruesome cases we've worked on, We've helped a lot of people clear up old cases as well, quash old warrants so that you can get your driver's license back, help people, work with that issue also. We've helped remove mugshots. We help people restore their rights so they can go vote and possess a firearm again. All sorts of stuff. Basically, the goal is if you have been harmed by the justice system, if you are somebody that has been knocked off balance a little bit, may have been a simple mistake, may have been something that needs to be addressed a little bit more seriously with a little more focus, whatever the situation is, we can help. We've got a great team of people here. We offer free case evaluations. We're very good at what we do. We're passionate about this type of work, and we would love to speak with you. So if you or anybody that you know or love is in this situation, we'd be honored and humbled if you refer them to our office. We'll make sure we take good care of them and that they leave better than they found us. And so that's it for me, everybody. I want to thank you for trusting us in spending time with us today. Thank you for your referrals. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your support on locals. Thanks for all the mod help. Thanks for the great questions. A lot of good questions today. Very long show. Very appreciative of that. We are going to be back here, same time, same place tomorrow, but a quick show note, not going to be here Thursday or Friday. Okay, I've got a conference that I got to go to. I'm just going to unplug because I got to get really invested into this thing, and I'm going to do that Thursday or Friday. So just a quick show note, when I'm not here on Thursday or Friday, we didn't get canceled probably. We're just taking 2 days off. So just brace yourselves for that. I'm already depressed about it. Like depressed, but has to get done. So we're going to do that. Everybody, thank you so much once again for being here. Same time, same place tomorrow. We are going to hop on Clubhouse right now because this show went so long. Not going to spend a ton of time on there tonight. So if you're in there, this is a little bit of a forewarning. But Clubhouse, the link is in the description below. We're having fun on there. Had a very good conversation last night that went pretty long, and actually it was very provocative, and I learned a lot. So some good stuff happening there. Come check that out if you want. Otherwise, I'll see you right back here tomorrow, same time, same place, 4 p.m. Arizona time, which is Pacific time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central in Texas, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. And for that one Florida man, everybody have a wonderful night. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.